yourself a website online, Squarespace are the people you want to work with. I've personally always been intimidated at the idea of even starting a website, but these guys got me up and going within half an hour. I spend more time on character creators in video games. It takes you just a handful of minutes to get the basics, and they walk you through everything, no matter how intricate you want to get. They have a ton of preset designs that you can just get up and going at your heart's content, and it all looks super professional. And for those of you who want to get a little bit more bold and creative, you can go behind the curtains and tweak every little thing to your heart's content. If you're trying to put together a shop, portfolio, or whatever, they have tools that can track your growth, help you build an ad campaign, integrate with other social media platforms, and again, all of that is streamlined and easy to understand. It takes very little effort to get something clean and professional up in front of the world. Having your own domain name looks super sexy on a business card. And to make it even easier, if you head over to squarespace.com/gameapologist, you will get 10% off your first purchase. Seriously, you could get this done in the time it takes you to watch this video. Thank you again to Squarespace for helping out, and on with the show. Bethesda. Bethesda never changes. While they have dabbled in multiple genres, the studio made a name for itself by creating massive open-world RPGs with their now famous Elder Scrolls games. This would follow suit once they got a hold of another franchise, Fallout. Their first entry in the franchise, Fallout 3, was a grand adventure that let you interact with its world on a much more intimate level than most other games of the time, in a way only the likes of this team could provide. But it had its problems. Glitches were to be expected in a world this massive and ambitious, so we gave it a pass. Then came New Vegas only a year and a half later, another open world that admittingly had plenty of bugs and a lot of the same assets as Fallout 3. But this was outsourced to Obsidian, who had very limited time to create this game, so we gave those hiccups a pass as well. Bethesda would take a break from the Fallout series to return to their beloved Elder Scrolls. But finally, in 2015, we would get Fallout 4, which featured a brand new map, overhauled level system, and more bugs. The game was still considered a solid entry, but more and more people were noticing the same issues had plagued these games for nearly 20 years. And now, 3 years past all this, comes Fallout 76. And with it, more bugs and glitches than ever before, an engine showing its age, and a system at odds with the heavily touted online component. It seems that the fanbase has finally had enough of the same issues, especially in a world that has Breath of the Wild and Red Dead 2. We have a lot to be thankful for with this developer. They've helped usher in a whole new genre and brought us some of the greatest gaming landscapes we've ever seen. But the game industry has changed. The open world genre has changed. But Bethesda never changes. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games.
Hello, Nicholas.
Whoa!
I see you're talking about my game.
We're not doing this.
Doing what, Nicholas?
No, I don't do stupid characters or plots. I hate it when gaming shows pull that nonsense. And those guys at Funhouse have already done the oil tycoon Todd Howard shtick.
We're going to this picture of Todd Howard to get some more information. Todd, what can you tell us?
My name's Todd Howard.
Right,
You may have heard of me from other such things and stuff.
You're just looking at this the wrong way. The cringy humor, characters, all played by the same person, these aren't outdated flaws. It's just part of a gaming channel's charm.
I get the feeling you say that a lot.
Besides, Fallout 76 is a multiplayer game. Sure, you could do this on your own, but it's much more fun with friends. So, what do you say? Let's go on this adventure together, friend.
Nope! Alright, so quick overview if you've never touched a Fallout game before. These games take place in a world slightly different from ours. It shares most of the same timeline as the real world, but at some point there was a divergence in how tech was handled. So where we live in a world with high-speed internet and mobile phones, Fallout's tech evolved from the lines of how the 1940s and 50s saw the future, that whole world of tomorrow shtick. So they got robot help and hovering cars, but decided to keep Art Deco around a little while longer, which was a wise choice in my opinion. Those are generally most of the differences from the real world. Oh, and there was a massive nuclear war that decimated the planet. Probably deserves mention. While the Fallout series has hopped around a couple of different genres since its inception, ever since Bethesda took the reins, they've modeled it around the tried and true open world first-person RPG playstyle that made them famous. You'll get people saying that these games aren't as good as the reviews of the time made them out to be, or tell you that they're nowhere near as good as the originals, but you can't argue that this game series really didn't become a household name until Bethesda bought up the brand.
Exactly. What are you losers complaining about? Were you hankering for a Brotherhood of Steel too? You're welcome, nerds.
Generally, most people find the Bethesda games a pretty solid time. I certainly do. I loved 3, 4, and New Vegas. Even if that was technically done by Obsidian, you get the point. Fallout 76 is the latest in the series, and like previous Bethesda entries, has a giant, highly interactive map full of shooting, exploration, and crafting. What makes this particular game stand out is its multiplayer component. For the first time ever, you can explore the world of Fallout with other people. You can still do everything on your own, but the best way to get things done is to work together. That's what we were told anyway.
That's right, buddy.
But before we get into the game proper, just so you can understand the full scope of things, we need to take a step back in time. You'd be forgiven for believing 76 was the first attempt to bring Fallout online, but this idea has actually been tossed around for quite a while. Fallout was originally owned by Interplay, but when they began hitting money troubles, they had to sell off some stuff. One of those stuff was Fallout. But even though Interplay sold the Fallout IP to Bethesda, they still had the rights to publish another game as long as they could secure the proper budget, developer, and, well, the game itself in a particular time frame. That game was Fallout Online, a massive multiplayer online game set in the Fallout universe. This would easily be one of their biggest projects to date. MMOs aren't exactly cheap, but they still had big plans. Players could choose one of the many races of people or creatures, each with their own unique campaign and story, and it would feature a large open world full of quests, player-run towns, guilds, the whole shebang. Quite an ambitious undertaking to say the least. But thanks to the newfound popularity of Fallout 3, surely an undertaking worth taking. But also thanks to that newfound popularity, Bethesda was not exactly keen having their critical darling of a series tarnished by a subpar product. They would take Interplay to court for a number of reasons to prevent the game's release, saying Interplay wasn't hitting their deadlines for securing funding, and when Interplay not only proved that they could, did, and were actually well underway with the project, Bethesda would then claim the only thing they had the rights to was the Fallout name, none of the assets, creatures, or anything else within the franchise. Interplay still managed to win that injunction, but Bethesda was relentless, continually pressing legal disputes whenever they could. It would be 3 full years of this insanity before Interplay finally relented and settled out of court in 2012, and in turn, canceling Fallout Online.
Score 1 for the good guys.
You guys sued the original creators of Fallout even though you agreed to a completely legitimate business arrangement.
Don't be ridiculous. They were taking us for a ride, taking advantage of our youthful optimism.
You guys bought the Fallout franchise for $5.75 million. The approximated net worth of the series is currently $45 million.
And who do you think made it worth that much money? I did those guys a favor. Besides, it was $5.75 million. How can I pass up a deal like that? Suckers.
Bethesda is notorious for taking anybody to court, and I mean anybody. They've sued Mojang, the creators of Minecraft, for making a game named Scrolls, a word they clearly own all the rights to since it shows up in the title Elder Scrolls. But they weren't just picking fights with the Minecraft developers. They've gone after a small Kickstarter project for using the word pray in the title Pray to the Gods, and YouTuber Captain Sparkles for releasing a mobile game named Fortress Fallout. And these are only the lawsuits over common English language words and video game titles. This isn't even touching the lawsuits with EA, former employees, secondhand sellers, and even their own fans producing art inspired by their games.
Nick, buddy, I thought this show was about the positive aspects of a game, not dwelling on the past. This has nothing to do with the game. Maybe we should talk more about that, huh? I'd hate to get the lawyers involved.
This is getting a little off the rails, and we could make a full playlist on the history of Bethesda legal cases. But I need to make it clear just how aggressive Bethesda can be when it comes to protecting their properties. Some of these cases might be justified, but more than a handful are petty. But the point is, they take their branding very, very seriously. Fallout 3 was a commercial and critical darling. Sure, they only spent $5.75 million on Fallout, but I'm sure they spent just as much making sure Fallout Online never came out. Interplay squandered the title before. They weren't about to let them continue to bring down the value after they've already sold it off. Bethesda would spend years afterwards pushing out anything Interplay could do to muddle the brand. Of course, their games take a lot of time to make, so to keep that hype train rolling after Fallout 3, they would outsource Fallout New Vegas to Obsidian. In the meantime, they would release Skyrim, which quickly became the best-selling Elder Scrolls game. Bethesda was only getting bigger and bigger with each release. So when it was time to finally come back to the Fallout franchise, they came back in a big, bad way. In 2015, Bethesda would host their very first E3 showcase, showing the gaming world they were ready to rub shoulders with the likes of Ubisoft and EA. Todd Howard came up on stage and forever cemented himself to the wider gaming audience as the face of Bethesda, the face of Fallout. Fallout 4 became the centerpiece of their showcase and arguably the entirety of E3 that year, going into exquisite detail about all the exciting new features, mechanics, upgrades, that killer special edition featuring a Pip-Boy, and stealth dropping a cute free mobile game the same night. And to top it all off, announcing this gargantuan game was only a few months away. This was a huge deal. Oftentimes, publishers want to show off what they have cooking as soon as a vertical slice is ready to go, announcing games we won't see for years. Bethesda not only let us know that the next big giant project was not only coming, but it was also nearly here. November rolled around, and with it, Fallout 4, and it quickly became the most profitable of the series. 4, more than any other game in the series, pressed hard into making sure Fallout had an identity and plenty of merch to show off your love for the game. Now, you'll find plenty of people telling you that 4 had its problems. I personally loved it, platinumed the thing, and enjoyed it to pieces. Fallout is one of my favorite gaming series, but even I have to admit, by the time I'm done with a Fallout game, I'm done with that series for a good long time. So it came as a bit of a surprise to me that 3 years after the initial release, 2 years after the Game of the Year edition, and only a few months after the VR edition of Fallout 4, Bethesda seemed poised to announce a new Fallout game. I was of course excited, but it just felt too soon. They take a long time to make these games, and normally they take turns between Fallout and Elder Scrolls. Maybe they were finally letting Obsidian make a new Fallout game? They did after all make New Vegas, and that's widely considered the best Fallout game. And their track record as a developer has only improved from that time. But no, Obsidian said it wasn't them. So who was it? Turns out, it was being made not by an outside developer, but by Bethesda Game Studios themselves. And the game was Fallout 76. E3 2018 rolled around and Todd popped up on stage with his latest stand-up routine.
I'm trying to work it down to a solid 15.
And once he was done with his Skyrim jokes that turned out to not actually be jokes, we were finally given the skinny about 76. Todd hit all of the same notes as that glorious 2015 presentation, diving into all the new features, more news on that cute mobile game, announcing an extensive collector's edition, promising a map 4 times the size as the last game, and the biggest feature of all, multiplayer. He had almost made a carbon copy of that hyped 2015 show, but for some reason this time, it felt off. For many of us, this game did not exactly sound promising even when it was first announced. Always online? No zany characters? No crazy elaborate plots? No choices that affected the world and the people inhabiting it? It all sounded kinda sketchy. But hey, they have a map that glows in the dark.
And don't forget that every copy of Fallout 76 comes with a copy of Skyrim.
No, it doesn't.
It does if you buy Skyrim.
Despite our worries, Todd would keep hyping the game up. This would be made by Bethesda Studios themselves, and while it was true they've never made something quite like this before, Bethesda is also a publisher with quite the variety of developers under its umbrella. Each of these teams have created some fantastic content, and they even had a team in charge of Elder Scrolls Online, so they should have everything they need to make this an instant classic. And even though it looked a lot like Fallout 4, Todd the Bod promised us that they were doing a whole bunch of new stuff and this was the biggest, baddest thing they had ever worked on. Still, more concerns would show themselves once they launched the beta of the game. As a pre-order bonus.
Why pay people when you could just have the fans do the job for you? Better yet, have the fans pay you for the privilege. It's brilliant.
Now, a game in beta has radically changed in meaning these past few years, but the basic idea remains the same. It's one last pass through the game, looking for bugs and glitches before finalizing and releasing the product. But players were reporting some pretty serious glitches, and Bethesda was planning on releasing this thing only a few short weeks later. How on earth were they planning on getting this thing in shape by then? But hey, Bethesda had never truly let down the core fan base. Technical flaws aside, they always seemed to deliver an enthralling, immersive adventure. Fallout 76 would prove, if nothing else, to be a worthwhile experience, right? Finally, on November 14th, 2018, Fallout 76 was released upon the world.
And everyone loved it. The end.
We've spent all of this time not talking about the good in a bad game. We haven't even gotten to the bad in a bad game yet. But Fallout is a big game that's part of a big series. And I think it's important to look back at everything that has been building up to this point. Despite all the time and energy Bethesda went into shutting down Interplay's online Fallout, suing anyone who could potentially tarnish their precious IP, the years of experience with this gameplay, help of other studios, throwing big stupid splashy shows that had Andrew WK screaming at confused nerds, and all the hype in the world, Fallout 76 turned out to not only be a bad game, but the worst reviewed AAA game released in 2018. To many, this wasn't just a dud. This was a betrayal of trust and loyalty. Yeah, join the club. The gameplay is an absolute mess. Sloppy gunplay and awkward melee action to ward off enemies that look like they're gliding across the ground as if the entirety of the wasteland had been freshly waxed. Mundane missions that just sent you out on fetch quests, and you really don't get much that's noteworthy unless you stay on the main storyline. And I use that term loosely. The story is barely there. You're basically following the trail of the worst leader in the world, the overseer of your vault, as she runs across the map looking for missile silos and uncovering her past all at the same time. Even though the point of your vault was to restart society, so you do that by just popping open the vault and letting a bunch of hapless idiots scatter about while you leave them voicemails. That's how you reclaim the planet. This game looks and feels like Fallout 4, even though we were told this was a brand new experience built from the ground up. They just straight up lift character models from Fallout 4 and plop it into this game. They are using the same stupid engine that's been a chuggy mess for over a decade. It wasn't exactly cutting edge 3 years ago, and it certainly isn't the case today. It's not only like Fallout 4, but it actively plays worse than Fallout 4. There are some elements that flat out don't work in an always online multiplayer setting. They set out to make a multiplayer game that still felt desolate, still felt hostile. This is the apocalypse after all. They wanted every interaction with a new person to be tense, unsure of whether or not you can trust this stranger. At the same time, they also wanted to make the game completely playable for solo players. Make it still feel like the Fallout games they know and love, but these designs set up a lot of contradictory issues. On the single player side of things, since you're in an always online world, you have to deal with the problems that come with it. Gone are some key components that help coat over some of the annoyances of previous Bethesda Fallout games. You can still sleep to recover health, but unlike previous games that would jump forward in time, since you can't skip time for everybody else who's playing on your map, you just have to sit there and watch your character recover. And since you can't stop time, well, you can just say goodbye to VATS. It's still there, I just don't know why it is. Not to mention, you constantly have to keep an eye on your thirst and hunger levels, which used to be an optional mode for extra challenge, but here it's just mandatory, and it dips way too often. And it, of course, makes it a reason for you to constantly jump back onto your Pip-Boy screen. Since the world can no longer pause when you're twiddling around with your inventory, it's going to get you into a lot of trouble when you're trying to switch out a gun, ammo, armor, refill health, food, or drink. And yeah, you can hotkey onto a favorites wheel, but you're constantly having weapons break or run out of ammo, depleting health items, stat boosting chems, meaning you're going to constantly be swapping out weapons, chems, and food, leaving you to fill hotkeys on a pretty consistent basis, meaning you will be in the inventory a lot, no matter how prepped you are. Early levels in Fallout games have always been a bit of a challenge, even with the ability to freeze time and play around with your arsenal. This stuff should get easier the more you level up. You figure out your favorite playstyles and get into a familiar pattern with how you deal with the world around you. But getting to those higher levels in 76 is an absolute chore, and playing by yourself is a lonely, boring, and repetitive experience. It doesn't help that the new leveling system is a confusing card system. Feels like I'm playing solitaire every time I try to figure out what perks I want to play around with. And And I get why they had to switch some things around here. Obviously some things won't work in this new playstyle, but this confusing layout looks like it was laying the groundwork for microtransactions. I'm complaining a lot from a single player perspective, and to be fair, that's how I played most of this game. There are some things that are elevated when you play with other people. But as a multiplayer experience, well, there are a lot of elements that don't mesh well here either. It's true they removed the traditional narrative, but if you want any of the lore while tromping around with others, you'll have to stop to read terminals, and in true Bethesda form, they give you a lot to read. Or you have to tell everybody in your party to shut up for a couple of minutes while you listen to a holotape. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to force single players into constantly remaining online. You're rarely running into people as it is, and they're not intimidating since they barely chip away at health if they attack you unprovoked. And they certainly don't replace the narrative experience that companions and human AI gave you in previous games. Unless you're actively playing the game with friends, you're spending most of this time by yourself. The map is too big, the player count too low, and the threat level from other human players is next to nothing. What you will run into commonly are internet issues, because nothing quite immerses you in a post-apocalyptic wasteland like a steady Wi-Fi connection. Even if your internet is perfectly fine, something somewhere is screwing it up and will lock you out of controls or kick you out entirely. And oh man, we could keep going. All the nonsense with the nuke launches flat out not working after the new year hit, that developer room that uncovered a human NPC and loot boxes, or how power armor would turn you into a walking knife. And it doesn't stop in the game world. No. This mess spelled out into the real world. Bethesda not selling the game on Steam and forcing PC players into yet another account to sign up for, and then just make a mess out of the refunds. The game going on sale not even a month after release, and really, this game should be free. It's not worth $35. It's certainly not worth $60. And it absolutely isn't worth the $200 you had to spend to get the special edition. And even in that big dumb box of toys lies yet another controversy. It's time to talk about the bag. Along with the game itself, the Power Armor edition of the game came with a big dumb helmet that you would wear once for a selfie, here's mine, and never touch again. To be fair, it is adorable, has a light and a voice modulator, but it's really nothing we haven't seen for years on store shelves with those Stormtrooper helmets. This thing isn't worth $200. But that's not the only thing you get. You also get a map that glows in the dark, a bunch of little army men, a steelbook, and a cheap nylon bag. So what's the big deal? This isn't exactly out of the ordinary. Overpriced junk is pretty common with collector's editions, and idiots like myself gobble them up. The problem is with the bag. See, this wasn't originally advertised as a crappy nylon bag. This was supposed to be a canvas bag. They swapped out the materials without ever telling anybody. When a justifiably angry customer called Bethesda out on the nylon surprise, a rep with an unfortunate name responded with a pretentious little message. Due to the unavailability of materials, we had to switch to a nylon carrying case for Fallout 76 Power Armor Edition. We hope this doesn't prevent anyone from enjoying what we feel is one of our best collector's editions. As you can imagine, the community did not take well to that at all. So, Bethesda came back with an apology of 500 atoms, the imaginary in-game currency you can use to buy imaginary things in this video game. In real life, that's $5 US, which isn't even enough money to buy an imaginary bag with your imaginary money. To make matters worse, it turned out that canvas bags were created for influencers and YouTubers.
Hey there, Nick.
Oh, God.
Looks like someone has a YouTube channel.
Just go away.
Did somebody want a canvas bag?
I mean, yeah, I did pre-order the collector's edition.
Oh, Nick, you silly boy. Look at that subscriber count. Canvas isn't for you.
But I actually bought the collector's edition.
I'm sorry, but canvas is a rare commodity. We only have enough for the people who can sell my game. Why spend millions on advertisers when you can just give people a canvas bag? It's crazy. You know how cheap and easy it is to make a canvas bag?
Look, to be fair, Bethesda did finally cave and promise to deliver canvas bags to anybody who proved they purchased a Power Armor edition of the game. But of course, that's not all. As it turns out, there was a bit of a hiccup in their system that exposed player data of anyone sending in a ticket for a replacement bag. Addresses, numbers, credit card info, and more was let loose onto the world just because people wanted to get the thing they were originally promised when they threw $200 down on a product that turned out to be a bust on multiple levels. It's crazy just how much has gone wrong with 76. And it's crazy that I haven't really spent that much time on any single issue. That stupid bag is just one of many problems. Trust me, we could create a full video series, and I'm sure some people already have. I've tried to condense what feels like a non-stop stream of issues since this game was launched in November. When it's showing up in gaming news, it's probably not good news. Fallout 76, once again, the worst reviewed AAA game of 2018. It's showing up at the top of plenty worst games of the year lists. This should have been an instant hit. They had everything they needed to make this work. Fallout Online had plenty of cool ideas, they had plenty of in-house help, certainly enough money and resources, and still this somehow feels like less of a game than Fallout 4. But at least it's still a better game than Jurassic Park Evolution, at least according to IGN. Good job, Dan.
Nick, buddy, you're sure spending a lot of time on these silly little mistakes. When are you gonna get to the good stuff?
I don't know, Todd. Stop screwing up your game so I can wrap this episode up.
You'll be hearing from my lawyers, peasant.
All right, let's get to it. Here's something you need to understand about me. I'm a weird guy. I have weird hobbies, one of which is exploring abandoned places. I don't know why, but I know I'm not alone in this fascination. As I've discovered a few years ago, there's a whole community behind this odd thing, and they've given it a name: urban exploring. In our modern world, there's not much we can do to find a real sense of adventure, mystery, or even some eerie supernatural feeling if you believe in that stuff. Urban exploring scratches that itch, as do video games of certain genres, and I think I speak for a lot of urban exploring gamers when I say that there are few game series that really match that hobby like Bethesda's 3D Fallouts, and there is always something new to see on this map. It's huge and devoid of friendly life, but don't take that to mean there isn't something to see. This is not a boring landscape. The unique landmarks, references to real-life places in history, all of this is still as breathtaking to me as it always has been, and it remains my main draw to this franchise. Yes, I know, I've seen all the arguments explaining how great the characters are in the original games, and they are valid arguments and I absolutely miss them. But that's not what draws me to this world. I'm here for this world. And the fact of the matter is, well, 76 has an awesome map. It might very well be one of the best this team's put together. It's varied, it's huge, and it has tons of little spots to discover. Do I miss the story and characters? Absolutely. But apparently Bethesda has never done that great of a job with that stuff, so they left it behind to try something different. And honestly, that's a bit of a shame. I would have loved to see this map in a proper Fallout game, but this is not Fallout 5. This is something familiar, and certainly worse in many aspects, but it's still something different. Like a lot of other games you're going to see on the show, your enjoyment is going to depend a lot on your expectations and personal preferences. I have loved exploring 3D spaces in gaming since the days of Sega Saturn and PS1, and it's a lot of fun reading through all the new lore or piecing together the final days of people you never got to meet. And I love that a lot of these new monsters are based on urban legends in West Virginia. What an awesome way to appreciate and experience a real-world setting in a surreal way. And I know I'm not the only one who's fascinated with cryptozoology and urban myths. They wouldn't be killing it on YouTube if that wasn't the case. And I think these designs are pretty fantastic. This is the type of stuff I actively seek out in gaming because it's only in this medium do you actively interact on this level. It's not the most immersive experience, but it's better than most other means out there. How many of you knew what a snallygaster was before this game came out? When roaming on my own, and when the game is running fine, I do have a fun time exploring, looting, and building. It's fun to just zone out with some music or a podcast and really root around one of the many locations in this game. But like I stated before, this is a multiplayer game. And from what I see, that's when the game is at its best. I've seen people dismiss this point time and time again, saying that any game is better with more people, and somehow that doesn't apply to a game that's specifically built for multiplayer? Getting together with your friends to explore the wasteland, taking on threats or other players? That sounds like a pretty fun time. The problem is, that's a very specific scenario, but if it's one you find yourself in, you might have a really good time. It certainly seems to be the case for many others. I have never known a fully online game to launch without issue. Some more than others, but underwhelming or flat out disastrous launches are unfortunately not uncommon. And considering how many games we play in early access and how a game can evolve well past launch, I came into this with a little more patience than I normally would allow. I've been plenty annoyed, as my poor friends could tell you, but more often than not, I've been having a good time. That's not to say I think people are wrong for being upset. Not at all. I spent a lot of time time in this video talking about the history that led up to this insane mess for a good reason. I think just maybe it's also important to remember to chill out a little bit, not jump down the throats of people who are having a good time with this thing, because despite the flaws, I still find myself drawn back to this game. I still have a lot left to do, and I am rooting for this team to turn this mess around. I really am. I want to jump back in a few months from now and hopefully see a game a little closer to their original vision. I'm not happy with the release. I'm not happy with how they've handled themselves as a business, but if anybody's losing sleep over this game, honestly, it really should only be the people who have made this thing. And even then, I don't feel like they deserve that stress. You guys gotta remember, there are actual human beings who made this thing happen. There are so many people being harassed just because they made a game you didn't like. We can feel a little ripped off, and it's really easy to poke fun at figureheads.
At least I'm not Randy Pitchford.
But at the end of the day, you can turn off this game and carry on with your life. Honestly, I think we're going to get something worthwhile from this failed experiment down the road. So, do I recommend this game? Yeah, I can't recommend it. At least not at full price. And certainly not at this time. Like I said, I understand why people are still roaming around with their friends and finding plenty of fun. And maybe it's not as bad as it's made out to be, especially if they continue to patch and improve the thing. But as of right now, it's still a bad game. Over and over again, I hear people that were once excited for future Bethesda games now incredibly concerned. Todd keeps saying they're using new tech, but we keep running into the same issues over and over again in all of their games. And Fallout 76 is above and beyond the worst offender. Can we really trust Bethesda to make things right when many would argue they've never truly learned from their mistakes? Can they win the community back?
Of course we can. How do you think we've gotten away with pulling the same crap over and over all this time? Because you keep buying it. Joke about Skyrim's re-releases all you want. We'll stop pumping it out when you stop buying it. But you won't. You never will. All we have to do is work on this silly little game until it's somewhat functional, come out on stage and say, whoopsie, I'll say a couple more jokes in my expense, brush all of this off, and it'll be back to business as usual. With all you sheep back in line, waiting to give me money for the next digital junkyard for you to scrounge around in. No matter what broken garbage I spit out, people will eat it up. They will always be back. They will always kneel to God Howard.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe not.
Beg your pardon?
The gamer is a fickle beast, and Bethesda is no EA. They don't have that safe Madden crowd to rely on every year, and these games don't come out on a yearly basis. Even then, they don't make juggernaut sales like Rockstar does every time Red Dead or Grand Theft Auto drops. And keep in mind, Red Dead 2 came out only a short while before 76.
Who cares? Cowboys are for grandpas.
And the team who made arguably the best 3D Fallout is now owned by Microsoft. And it looks like they're putting out a game that's going to scratch that itch that 76 failed to relieve with Outer Worlds.
Yawn.
And let's not forget CD Projekt Red, who delivered the masterful Witcher 3 and has Cyberpunk just waiting in the wings.
Snore.
And of course, when it comes to open worlds, you have the likes of Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, which looks like it's going post-apocalyptic.
Get the legal team ready.
And Rage 2 is just around the corner.
Who cares about Rage 2?
Well, you probably should, Todd. Bethesda's publishing this one.
Oh yeah, that's right. Be sure to pick up another copy of Skyrim.
My point is that Bethesda may have a strong brand and a large fan base, large enough that 76 was the 4th best-selling game last November, but those numbers won't stay high forever. Not in a world full of better options. Not in a world where you can just pick up the latest port of Skyrim and play it again.
Coming soon to the Pip-Boy.
Look, at the end of the day, this story is not over. I'm just hoping for a happy ending. There's a lot of stupid mistakes, and again, this is objectively a bad game. It's tough to talk about current games on the show, because there are still people going to work every day trying to rein in this mess, all while dealing with the absurd rage of the internet. And at the same time, I can't exactly condone bad business practices that pushed a product like this out the door. I'm sorry if this video is giving you a mixed message. It's because I have mixed feelings. I'm sorry if you're coming in expecting me to come to the full defense of this game, but I can't dismiss a bad game either. I told you what I liked. I hopefully touched on why other people liked this game, and right now, I don't know. I wasn't jonesing for a new Fallout. I didn't have high hopes for this game, and I'm willing to be patient. Take a step back and see what things look like a year from now. Gaming is now a place where a title can be a completely different experience depending on when you play the game. They're gonna continue to work on this, and they'll continue to improve. So for now, I'm closing up Vault 76. And the next time I come to visit, maybe we'll see something really worthwhile. And even in the end, if this ends up being a bust, even if it's too little too late, I certainly hope Bethesda has learned from their mistakes for the next time this series or any of their games roll around. Hopefully, this was a wake-up call, because in order to survive this Fallout has to change. Toot toot, Vault Dwellers. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. We've waited long enough. We've already covered Sonic 1, 2, and CD. It's finally time to get back to the series and talk about Sonic Spinball. I feel like every one of these Sonic retrospectives goes through the original Genesis games ready to dig deep and talk about the mechanics and the history and give our own spin on it, and to help give a definitive answer about which one's the best and all this other, and then there's... right. That game. This irritating little distraction, this unnecessary detour. Sonic Spinball was the very first Sonic spin-off. Oh wow, that pun has layers! Sega was pretty dismissive about the game, and in turn, I feel like a lot of the fan base is as well. It's not that it's bad, it's just... I don't really want to talk about it. You don't really want to watch a video about it. We're just here, so let's get this over with. So say you were tasked with making a brand new Sonic game at the height of the brand's popularity, and you have very little time to put this thing together because your bosses at Sega just want something to fill out the Christmas market. Doesn't need to be anything mind-blowing, just good enough. So you look around, you see what you have. Well, they used a lot of pinball mechanics when designing this character. That Casino Night level from Sonic 2 was a really big splash. Maybe we can build a whole game around it. So you build off of what worked, put a game together, and the very first thing your players see is... Like, what was the inspiration here? How do you put Sonic and pinball together and come up with this nonsense? It's like the team was desperate to slap something together, and no matter how many hedgehogs they were shoving into pinball machines, they just couldn't get it right, so they just threw it all down the toilet, and then they're like, yes, that's it. No, we're missing something here. What else should we do? Look, I get it. Sonic is making his way through the underbelly of a fortress, and good for them for sticking so firmly to the story. Obviously, that's why we're here. Story is, Sonic is trying to make his way through the Vago Fortress, which sounds like a as seen on TV kitchen product, and looks like the backdrop of a death metal cover. Alright. I know this is a personal gripe, but it's very obvious the core Sonic team did not work on this title. The sound design, level design, physics, the entire game has this grimy metallic Genesis feel you'd find from Western developers of the day. Now maybe some of you like the look and feel of this game. Let's look at a more universal complaint, the difficulty. You'd think with only 4 levels and having a pinball you can actually influence mid-air, this game would be a breeze, but that's not the case. Not at all. The physics, while serviceable, just feel off. They're sluggish, especially if you just got done playing Sonic 2 with its slick and smooth momentum. And while there are only 4 levels, they're all super long, and they require you to do some fairly wacky things to grab emeralds that you need to progress through the level. And the game is very unforgiving with lives. Spent half an hour on a map only to lose a life? Well, back to the start for you. Pinball is a brutal and unforgiving sport. Of course, none of this is enough to really call this a bad game. And that's because, spoilers, this is not a bad game. It's divisive, it's a pain in the butt, but not a bad game. It's just different and fun. Not stellar, not great, just fine. And because of that, it doesn't really give you a whole lot of motivation to go back and play it. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I would even cover this game because I really didn't know what else to say that hasn't already been said. But we're here, and I obviously made a video for a reason. So, let's get to the good. Okay, so before you do anything else in this game, head over to the options menu. I know, I'm sorry, just endure it. You'll get through it, I'm so sorry. And change the game speed. And suddenly, holy cow, it's not so sluggish anymore. I really wish the game didn't default into that slower mode, and I get that it makes things easier, but it's just not as fun. There are certainly other means to curve that difficulty. The game is a lot more fun in this option, and like most games of this era, you can just use passwords to jump to later levels if you like. While starting off in a sewer would not have been my first choice when it comes to an opening level, level. Honestly, all of the maps are very detailed and have a lot going on, both in design and interactivity. When my biggest complaint about design is, well, this aesthetic is not what I would normally associate with Sonic or Pinball. Well, that's not much of a complaint at all. In terms of design, it is both wildly different from anything else we had seen from Sonic games thus far, yet it manages to remain thematically consistent through the adventure. It's gross, it's grimy, but in its own way, kinda beautiful. There's always something interesting happening on the screen, and despite the blue hedgehog on the blue background for the first level, it's easy to keep track of Sonic. And as a kid, I thought this was kinda cool. I liked having a Sonic game with a somewhat different art style. And while I did rag on the sound, honestly, most of it isn't bad, just that options. Ugh. And while I prefer the original noises, I gotta tell you, I always love Spinball Spin Dash. Since this isn't either a traditional pinball game or a traditional Sonic platformer, you end up with an interesting fusion of both. You could play this like a pinball game, meaning you have 3 balls and you play as long as the score count will let you go, or you can play this like a platforming adventure. You have an objective, collectibles, and an end goal to reach. Whether your ultimate destination is at the top of a scoreboard or to the end credits, the game's got you covered. But what exactly do I mean when I call this a platform pinball game? Well, like I mentioned earlier, you do have some influence on where Sonic goes. And every now and then, you'll uncoil and you'll have to walk around with Sonic. I feel like it's mostly here to remind you that you are playing a Sonic game, but I do enjoy it. First for the reprieve from all the crazy pinball action, and yeah, admittingly, I am a little more invested because I'm playing Sonic and not some random metal ball. But I also like the creative ways they have you use Sonic through the game, be it to run to another section, grab hold of a switch, or just give you a wink when you grab an emerald. I think this is actually a pretty cool and creative game. Now, wacky pinball video games seem like a rarity, but Sonic Spinball is far from the first or last weird pinball video game. So obviously this weird fusion has legs, which makes it kind of surprising that Sega never went back and revisited this idea. I mean, sure, we got that Sonic pinball game on the GBA years later, but that's just regular pinball. And we did have those cute little moments in Sonic Adventure, but again, not a full game. There's never been a true sequel to Sonic Spinball, which is a shame because I feel like they made a lot of things work well, and I think a sequel would have really tightened things up. Even if this wasn't the first out there digital pinball experience, they really went wild with the potential ideas that could come from this fusion. And if you wanted a little more of a traditional pinball experience, they kinda have that in these goofy little mini games. Yes, that's right, this pinball game's bonus game is a different pinball game, with an actual ball, and different physics, and a different perspective, making this a somewhat difficult transition between the two playstyles. Well, whatever, it's still a neat little extra, and it's the only place in any Sonic game to feature the beloved American characters, and a chance to knock out Robotnik's teeth. Alright, I know this is a weird thing to focus on, but now that I'm thinking about it, they got real weird with Robotnik in this game, and I love it. Outside of playing his dentist in the bonus section, you also have to fight a giant scorpion with his face, and these weird glowing heads in a furnace that look exactly like him, and the big man himself. And I mean that quite literally. Robotnik is much larger here than in any of the other Sonic games. And while that's a weird thing to point out and praise, I'm gonna do that. The massive size difference between Sonic and Robotnik was a nice reminder that Sonic was indeed a hedgehog, and they tend to be much smaller than people, and this in turn makes Robotnik a little more imposing. This also works for the game since this is a pinball table, and you probably need a larger target for what they're trying to do here, and when I think about it for 2 seconds, I can understand why they wouldn't want Sonic to be closer to scale with a real-life hedgehog. And I'm spending far too much time on this weird little detail, but I noticed it, and I wanted to talk about it, so there you go. What other needless random nonsense can we talk about? Oh, I got one. Why did they have 2 different but eerily similar covers for the Genesis and Game Gear versions of this game? I mean, they had different covers for Game Gear versions of Sonic 1 and 2, but they had completely different scenarios playing out. Here, they had the late great Greg Martin create 2 different covers, basically showing you the same thing. The Genesis one had Sonic with that more rounded, thin shark quills that we've seen on all the American covers, and a more traditional Robotnik. But on the Game Gear one, they had a more traditional Japanese Sonic, you know, where his quills actually have a little volume to them, and that goofy American Robotnik design they used in some of the cartoons. I don't get it. Oh, that reminds me. There is a portable version of this game, and it's fine. Unlike other Sonic Game Gear titles, this one's actually a carbon copy of its more advanced sibling. so there's not a whole lot to talk about here. Back then it was cool because you had a console game on the go, but even that was a pointless feature once Sega brought out the Nomad. And if the physics are a little off in the Genesis version, they are way off in the Game Gear version. Again, it plays fine, but honestly there's really no real reason to play this version of the game when you can play the other version just about anywhere else. Unless you're a weirdo like me who likes remakes of console games, not a whole lot to see here. Maybe we'll talk about it again in some future episode, but for now that's really all you need to know. Regardless of the version, what we got here is still a solid time, and it holds up well today. And in fact, it might play even a little bit better today depending on how you play it. The original release doesn't have any save states, but that's certainly an option nowadays. And it's not like you need to illegally download it or anything. Say what you will about Sega's excessive re-releases of Genesis games and collections and what have you, but they've made this game readily available on just about everything. And even if you want an original copy, well, they're still super cheap. If you've never tried it and it sounds kinda cool, give it a shot. It's not gonna change your life, but you'll probably have a good time for a few hours. And if it's been a while since you tried it, maybe give it another go. Honestly, I had no idea I could speed up this game, and I had a way better time. I was not looking forward to this episode. The idea of jumping back into what I always felt was a largely inconsequential game turned out to be a really fun time. But that's all I got for now. Next time we tackle this series, we'll finally talk about the game you've all been waiting for.
That's right, baby! Mean Bean Machine!
Sonic が超音速で弾け飛ぶピンボールゲームに挑戦だ。アメリカ生まれのファンキーアクション、ソニックスピンボール。メガドライブからソニックビンゴプレゼント実施中。
Hello there, I'm Nick. Yeah, I'm definitely Nick. And this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. But today we're not talking about a bad game, but a system, and far from a bad one at that. Today we're here to talk about the Vita, or maybe more appropriately the Mortem, because you stupid idiots didn't buy it, and now it's dead. We knew it was gonna happen. The Vita has been on its deathbed for a long time now, and it's finally been put to rest as Sony recently announced that they had shipped their final units of this wonderful handheld. Now some of you may be thinking to yourself, wait, they were still making those things? And even more of you may be thinking to yourself, what's a Vita? To answer that question, you uncultured barbarian, the Vita was Sony's second attempt at a handheld game console after the PSP. Released in 2012, it was, at the time, far more powerful than Nintendo's 3DS and much more capable than most mobile phones. Certainly, the ones in its price range. Where the PSP was somewhere between the PS1 and the PS2 in terms of power, the Vita was somewhere between the PS2 and the PS3, featuring a crystal clear OLED screen, Wi-Fi capability, or even a 3G model, a touchscreen on the front and back, the ability to download and play your digital library of PSP and PS1 games, and launching with an exclusive Uncharted game just to show off how powerful this little machine can be. Even Ken Levine popped up on Sony's stage at E3 in 2011 to announce a BioShock game exclusive to the Vita. Man, can't wait to play that, Ken. This was all shaping up to be an incredible little machine. And it was. So why is it on the show? Let me make myself absolutely clear. The only reason I'm even covering the Vita is because it didn't sell well. And it should have, you monsters. But why didn't it sell well? Who can really say for sure, but there are some theories as to why people didn't gravitate toward the device. Perhaps it was a confusing name. Clearly this was the successor to the PSP, addressing many of that machine's shortcomings and providing a true next-generation experience, leading many of us to believe it could have been named the PSP 2. But since the PSP wasn't exactly breaking records, they tried to deviate away from all the branding and tell the consumers this was a new and unique machine, not just an iterative update akin to the likes of Apple's iPhones, even though that model has worked just fine for Sony's home console. Or maybe it has to do with some stupid choices made by Sony prior to launch. While it's true that the Vita had a 3G model that was exclusive to AT&T, and going by the audience's reaction...
And we'll be partnering with AT&T as the exclusive carrier for PlayStation Vita in the United States.
Yeah, not a popular choice. The 3G version launched a week before the Wi-Fi only version, and with a more expensive price tag, staggering the release and potentially confusing customers. And let's not forget the stupid expensive proprietary memory cards, asking high prices for relatively little storage. None of this helped the system, but I think Extra Credit nailed it best in a 5-minute video they released back in 2014. I recommend giving it a watch, but the long and short of it is this: the system was far too ambitious for its own good, and it didn't have enough software to back it up. When the Vita launched, it came with the promise of PSP so long ago, a console experience on the go, and while PSP did a commendable job through its lifetime, it was never really a breakout success for the company. And now the Vita had far more competition than ever. Console games are expensive to make, and not a lot of developers want to risk spending that much time and money on a potential flop. And while it's true the 3DS also launched with lackluster titles, Nintendo doubled down on the machine, releasing quality first-party content as well as dropping the price point. Sony, on the other hand, seemed only to distance itself from its own system as more time passed. While it was true you could get console-quality experiences on the Vita, they weren't exactly standout games. Uncharted was fine, but we already had 3 of those on the PS3. Assassin's Creed Liberation was a well-made game, but again, you had about 30 different games on the home console at that point. And Call of Duty? Well, as much as fun as it would be to have a first-person shooter on the go, COD Declassified was hot trash. While Sony does have beloved franchises, it's hard to argue that any of them have the fanbase of Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon. All Nintendo had to do was spit out enough of those games on the 3DS, and sure enough, the fans gobbled it all down. When it became clear the Vita would not hit sales expectations, Sony would instead back off the machine, and when their PS4 launched and became a ridiculous success, they didn't see the point in supporting their handheld. When the company making the machine does not have faith in it, why should the consumers? Well, let me tell you why. As of March 31st, 2019, the Vita is officially dead. Weird, because I've been hearing that the Vita has been dead for years now. Look, it was never a huge success, modest at best in Japan and almost impossible to find on store shelves here in America for years now, but the people who bought the Vita loved the Vita. Think about that for a minute. This machine, which Sony themselves stopped creating games for only a couple of years into its life, has survived almost 8 years on the market. Most of the extra features that were boasted in the beginning are dead. No more YouTube, Netflix, and that weird Near thing nobody used. And a lot of the games exclusive to the machine have been ported over to other systems. And honestly, that's a good thing. These developers worked hard on some incredible games. Their work should be in front of as many people as possible. That doesn't discount the wide variety of what you could and still can play on the Vita. What makes the Vita special is not the exclusive games. It's because you want to play everything on the Vita. It's a powerful, well-built, beautiful machine, and all these games look and feel wonderful. Let me share some of my favorite games I've first played on the Vita. I don't care if they're updated versions of older games or stuff that was released later or around the same time to the Switch and PS4. I'm not here to compare this machine to another. I'm not going to pretend like the Vita is about to win any competitions. I love this machine, and this is what I loved playing. Danganronpa, a game series about a group of high school kids being forced to kill each other in a game run by a psychotic teddy bear. Oh yeah, I should mention, the Vita quickly became the home for weird Japanese nonsense pretty quick. I don't want to spoil the fun if you haven't tried it yourself. The series first rose to prominence on the Vita, and once you've played, you'll understand why it's ballooned into a franchise and ported out onto other machines. The game is split between a visual novel-style narrative and Phoenix Wright-style courtroom processions where you try to figure out which teenager killed another teenager. It's great. Speaking of visual novels, well, there's a whole bunch of them. Virtue's Last Reward, Time Zero Dilemma, Amnesia Memories, I don't think that's how those work, Tokyo Twilight Ghost Hunters, Psycho Pass, Mandatory Happiness, Hatful Boyfriend? Not quite sure how to say that, where you date pigeons, and that's not even the weirdest part of the game. Steins Gate, Seven Scarlet, Norn 9, Valhalla, spelled with numbers. No, I did not lose control of all of my motor functions and start slapping my face against a keyboard. These are real titles. Japan, you are out of your damn mind. Don't you dare ever change. Let's transition slowly from dating sims and visual novels into RPGs, with Persona 4 Golden. Easily the best version of the game, and while I'm sure it will see life again on other systems, for now, the best place to play it is on the Vita. You also had a portable version of Final Fantasy X for the first time on Vita. Yes, I'm aware you can play it on the Switch, and good for you. Do that. I already did on the Vita, as well as just about every other Final Fantasy thanks to the back catalog of games on the PlayStation Store. In fact, a hefty amount of legendary PS1 RPGs can be played on this machine as well. Wild Arms, Suikoden, Grandia, Vagrant Story, Parasite Eve, yeah, that's there too. Not to mention the likes of YS? Did I just... How have we allowed game developers to name games like this for so long? What was I talking about? Oh right, RPGs. Demon Gaze, Stranger of Sword City, I Am Setsuna, good Digimon games. Who would have thought we'd see the day? And oh gosh, Child of Light, my precious little darling. I know it's on everything, but I got my physical version for the Vita and it is getting more praise. Sorry. But look at it. Look at the birds! Everybody rhymes. I don't have to leave it in my will for someone else to beat because it isn't a million hours long. No? Still not enough? You need some more Vita-specific stuff? Fine. I hope you like Monster Hunter. It's not like the Vita ever got its own Monster Hunter, probably would have helped sales, but whatever. They had plenty of clones for the machine, 2 of which are still exclusive to the Vita, Soul Sacrifice and Freedom Wars. You can tell both of these games were specifically made for the system as they both show off what it can do geographically, and the control scheme fits perfectly. I don't play a lot of Monster Hunter style games, so I can't really tell you how either of them fare in comparison, but both of them have a loyal fan base. So if you're a fan of mission-based action games that require a lot of prepping and crazy long boss fights, well, give it a go. While you're there, you can also play God Eater and... Honestly, the exclusives became scarce pretty quickly, but there are some strangely exclusive games of very popular franchises. Like I mentioned before, there's Call of Duty Declassified, but the less said about it, the better. But if you want a solid first-person exclusive, the system has its own Killzone, a technical wonder for the Vita and a very solid game. I haven't played much, so this is more of a second-hand recommendation. So if you're a fan of the series and this looks good to you, I'd recommend grabbing it while you can. This remains a Vita exclusive, as does Touch My Katamari. Look, I didn't know how to transition to this game, so just roll with it. Get it? Because you roll? Guys, I'm funny. Everyone's making such a stink about the original being released on the Switch when you have one actually built for a handheld that's been available for years. A little less surprising are the Vita exclusive versions of Mod Nation Racers and Little Big Planet, both of which try to take advantage of the system's many gimmicks to different levels of success. Mod Nation was fine, but if you want some more racing options, you also had portable versions of MotorStorm RC, Need for Speed Most Wanted, a Vita exclusive Asphalt, Wipeout, and Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, because I can't get away from this guy for just one episode. Vita's Little Big Planet was especially fun, as they incorporated the 2 touchscreens when possible. And like the PSP version not made by its original developer, Media Molecule, as they were busy with Tearaway. Now it's true that the game was re-released on the PS4 and sadly flopped on both systems, but I would argue that the Vita version, while missing some bells and whistles of the re-release, is still the version to play. Tearaway was made to take advantage of the system's touchscreen, camera, and microphone along with the standard controls, and it's actually a lot of fun. The art style is unique and oozing with that Media Molecule charm, and it gets you involved in the game's world on a level we would not see again until the likes of Moss and Astrobot on PSVR years later. And while talking about ports, having Vanillaware games on the go was just fantastic. Dragon's Crown, Muramasa, and my personal favorite, Odinsphere. Ugh, so pretty! Another game that started off as a defining game on the Vita only to be ported to the PS4 is Gravity Rush, a charming little open-world action game that lets you manipulate the gravity of the main character, Cat. Again, a gorgeous art style, charming characters, and most importantly, a lot of fun. Also, you can send random people to their deaths if you shift gravity around them. So, that's pretty cool. Uncharted. Golden Abyss still remains exclusive to the system, and it's a lot of fun. There are a couple of shoved-in gimmicks that include the touchscreen, but for the most part, it's a true, portable Uncharted experience. Nathan Drake is just as charming as he always is, as he invades ancient ruins he has no business being in, killing a small country's worth of people, and having Spider-Man-level clinging ability when climbing walls. If you're a fan of these games and you missed it, honestly, it's worth your time. There was also Assassin's Creed Liberation, and while it did get a digital re-release on newer systems, it started off on the Vita, and it still looks and plays great on its home handhelds. The first to star a female protagonist, just a weird choice. Girls are icky, right, my fellow males? Well, if you can get past that, it's a great game. The setting of New Orleans is unique for the series, but it still feels like a full Assassin's Creed experience. Woof. Look, I could keep listing games all day long. There are still all those downloadable PSP and PS1 games, crossplay, and buy games, and if you own them prior to owning a Vita, or held them in your PlayStation Plus stash, all of that stuff was just there and ready to go for you if you got into this machine late. You can still do that now. Have a bunch of PS1 games that you bought on your PS3 that you don't own anymore? It'll be ready to download on the Vita. Again, a lot of this stuff is not exclusive to the machine, and the stuff that remains exclusive, while a lot of it is solid, probably nothing I'd buy a system for. Regardless, there's a stunning amount of quality on the go, and for a cheap price on the Vita. There's a reason why there's still such a passionate following for this machine, despite it being dead for years. The build quality is solid, the screen is gorgeous, for the time it was very powerful. That sleep mode lasts forever. You can earn trophies on this thing, and it lets you play Klonoa anywhere you want. This was an incredible machine that none of us deserved, and it breaks my heart that it died such a slow death. But it took so long because the people who bought this thing saw its potential and still do to this day. And if I have to compare it to other handhelds? While I respect Nintendo's legacy, they've never built a handheld as well designed as this thing. Yes, the 3DS library is impressive, and the Switch is more powerful. It should be. It released 6 years after the Vita. To me, neither compare to the quality of the Vita. Again, Nintendo's stuff is fine. They clearly know how to make a system, but I like the look and feel of this machine. I just feel like whatever I play will be a high quality experience. Yeah, fine, it didn't meet its full potential. Had an uphill battle this whole way. In 2012, people called it dead. That extra credit video I mentioned? Published in 2014. Year after year, people said this machine was dead. It's true it wasn't crazy popular. It's true Sony did not support it with first-party titles for most of its time on the market, but dead? Hardly. It released in Japan in 2011, and the final day of its production was March 31st, 2019. That's a pretty respectable time span for any system. So let's not mourn its loss. Let's celebrate its legacy. Years from now, people will sing its legend, placing it on top 10 lists of most underrated systems alongside the likes of GameCube and Dreamcast. It was ahead of its time and just refused to stay dead, and you know what? Despite the production ceasing, I'm still not ready to call this little wonder machine dead quite yet. Somehow, I don't feel like we've seen the last of Sony's handhelds, be it homebrewed games, or if they somehow go insane and tackle the handheld market again. The Vita will survive. The Vita will never die, because the Vita is life. Toot toot, Sony fanboys.
Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games, despite the fact that dinosaurs are awesome! The games we're covering today are, not super awesome. And despite the fact that Jurassic Park is such a huge hit all over the world, and I'd imagine especially here in America, there are some games American gamers never got a chance to play. But spoilers, you're going to quickly discover why the games we're covering today never got localization. So now that you're already disappointed, let's take a trip to Jurassic Park, Japan. The first game we're covering is Jurassic Park Institute Tour, Dinosaur Rescue. But before we start our tour, a little bit of history. The Jurassic Park Institute Tour was an exhibition of sorts, a fun activity for kids to walk through with their parents and learn real-life dinosaur facts with that iconic JP branding to help sell the whole thing. Apparently, they used the actual Stan Winston molds to make the animatronic dinosaurs for this thing. I mean, it's won awards and everything. It's a real shame it never hit the States. I think I would have loved it. Clayton Fioriti, and I'm sorry if I'm saying your last name incorrectly, has already done a video about this. And if you somehow reached my channel before his, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a Jurassic Park fan. And if you want to know about the actual tour, because we're not talking about that today. We're going to talk about the video game based on the tour. I say based on the tour, but it's more like a slapdash promotional game only loosely based on the tour and the property. Yeah, that sounds right. Well, let's pop this sucker in and take a look-see. Okay, so we're starting off pretty nice. Got that iconic heavy stomp of the Velociraptor. Okay. And then it just, awkwardly stands there. How you doing, bud? Need some help? There you go. Atta kid. Now, as you can see, all of this is in English so far, which is nice, I guess. So let's get to the game, or games themselves. We have 5 options to choose from. Despite the fact that everything's been English up to this point, it's only when you start a minigame do you see that there's just a wall of Japanese text. But don't let that intimidate you. These games are so simple that even a raptor could play them. So let's just start from the top and work our way down. Oh boy, this is gonna be a short video. Do you see what's happening here? Do you really need me to explain this to you? This is a very sad Frogger clone. Do I actually have to describe this situation? What's that you say? I'm just padding this out because there's not really a whole lot to talk about in any of these games, and I'm just trying to make this video longer than 2 minutes? Yeah. So as you can see, you guide this stupid toddler past stampeding Triceratops to get him to the helicopter. And as you can also see, this is an absolute joke of a challenge. Now granted, the difficulty does ramp up slightly, but the only time I died was because I got so bored I stopped paying any kind of attention. That's it. Let's move on. Next, we're gonna take a ride in 2 all together now. Dodge the lava rocks. This is not hard. What am I doing? What am I doing here? So the only interesting thing out of this one is eventually you get a shiny dinosaur. I like shiny stuff. Very cool. I don't think we're doing Kenny Loggins proud here.
Danger zone.
Egg guard is next. I wrote nest in the script. This is a nest. We have fun. You play a pterodon who fends off hunters. This one actually kept me going a little bit. They ramped the challenge fairly well. Good for them. And look at that wee baby lizard bird. How adorable. Next game! Rexercise! Hilarious name! Oh, crap. It's Simon Says. Gonna be honest with you guys, this is the hardest of the games simply because it's Simon Says. And at this point, my attention span had no fighting chance against Rexy's morning cardio. The more I play this game, the more I appreciate the fact that they never made a Jurassic Park anime. And now that I say that out loud, I want that more than anything. Last one up is Take Meat. Take a guess what you do. Nope, not that. We're a family channel here. So crude jokes aside, what you're left with is, getting bored super quick while you pick up meat. That's right. You play a little raptor who has to feed its young. And it's about as eventful as anything else, and I don't know what else you want from me. Man, this is a collection of crap, guys. I like that you get to play a raptor. I mean, of course I do. And I like this risk-reward factor that comes with dodging the, cannonballs to pick up some bonus medallions, and you can actually grab as much meat as you want, but the more you grab, the slower you become, which is, I mean, a little bit of effort there, I guess. Good for them. But that's it, guys. We're done. That's Jurassic Park Institute Tour. That's the entire game. Oh, boy. Now, a few of you Jurassic fanatics might have already heard about this goofy little game, but I would bet even less of you have heard of this one. I only came across it myself just stumbling across a random eBay posting. I had never seen this game listed in any other Jurassic Park game listing. I've never seen the bigger Jurassic YouTube channels cover this. In fact, I can't even find a scrap of gameplay footage on YouTube. So, it is my honor to bring that to you today. Ladies and gents, may I present Peshide Konmaji Tatsujin. It's Pachinko. I'm sorry. I know. I'm so sorry. You waited all this time for a Pachinko game. Oh man. Like I said, I spotted this online randomly. Did a couple of searches and couldn't even find a common value for this thing. So I spent the $20 and had it imported from Japan. This was developed and published by Hackberry and falls right in the middle of a series of Pachinko games they released on PlayStation consoles. And as far as I can tell, it's basically just a digital recreation of a couple of Jurassic Park machines that you can find in the country. But I'm not here to give you a history of Pachinko and its place in Japanese culture, and it's only now that I realize I have no idea how to play Pachinko. But hey, we're gonna give it a shot. Let's pop this in and... oh boy. Alright, despite the intimidating language barrier, it didn't take me long to get a table going and, play? So from what I can tell, this game really does emulate an actual Pachinko machine. All you really do is feed these things money and it'll spit out little itty bitty balls with the intention of getting them into one of these little goals that will activate a slot machine, which can win you more balls and keep going. The only real control, as far as I can tell, is this little knob which controls the initial launch of said balls. This is about as much control as you are given over this entire process. After that, you have to hope these get into a goal, and in turn, hope this lands a jackpot, which I'm sure we're gonna land. Eventually. Holy crap, this is the worst. So you're able to pump this machine with fake money as often as you like, and you have some kind of control over some other aspects. The menu seems quite extensive, but for this idiot American, all I was really doing was just sitting here, only casually interacting with this thing. Hoping beyond hope I could at least trigger something. I knew this game was going to be boring, but I just wanted to provide some kind of footage as YouTube seems lacking. And after a half hour of absolutely nothing, finally, it looked like something was going to happen. And nothing happened. Oh, I just don't get gambling in general. I don't. I sat here forever just to get trolled, and by golly, I'm annoyed. I would have stopped right then and there, but I love you guys, and I wanted to get something online, so I kept going. I picked up the second table that's available on this game, opened up the menus, and diddled around with some stuff, and finally, I got this! Well, that was satisfying. Ooh. How you doing, bud? Need some help? There you go. Ah, the kid. I won a round, and then I won another round, and another, and I guess it's just gonna keep doing this. Okay. Well, I quickly learned that pachinko is not for me, and I think that was understood for a majority of American audiences, as there is little surprise as to why these two games were never released in the States. This really only counts as a video game because it was slapped onto a PS2 disc. I appreciate the attention to detail provided by the game. It looks like they carefully recreated the real-world machines, but all that said, it's still just pachinko. Guys, there's just not much to say on that front. Both this and the Institute Tour were released in 2003, and boy golly, just one rough year for this franchise. I don't see these games online too often, but I didn't pay much for either. That said, even at their current asking price, I personally don't think either of them are worth it. But if you are a Jurassic Park fan and you weren't aware of one or both, it won't cost you much to add these to your collection. And that's basically where we're gonna find the good in the bad today, guys. Just bringing some exposure to my fellow fans of both gaming and all things Jurassic. Thought it would make for an interesting little video, and I'm sorry it's not much more than that. If you want something a little more extensive, I do have some more Jurassic videos. If you have not checked them out yet, I highly recommend them. And of course, I will be covering the other games in the future, so just be sure to subscribe so you don't miss those. I hope you learned something today, and hey, if I somehow missed yet another Japan-exclusive Jurassic Park game, please, by all means, let me know. That pachinko game taught me to not trust everything I read on Wikipedia game lists. There's bound to be more to unearth here. Who knows what else survived? Toot toot, paleontologists. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good and bad... Where we look for the good and bad... I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. Sonic 3 is so far away from even coming close to being called a bad game, so maybe it's time we switch things up a little bit. Welcome to Unapologetic, where we look for the good in good games. And it's about time we talk about the best Sonic game ever created. Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Yes, fellow Sonic fans, I can feel you rolling your giant merged eyeballs at me. I'm one of those Sonic fans. The correct ones. those who sing the praises of this title and declare it the very best of the entire series, nay, one of the greatest games ever made. But I'm going to do my best to tell you why. Why this game has stuck with me and so many others after all these years, even in an industry that's constantly evolving at a crazy pace. Why does this game matter so much to me? You could dismiss this as nostalgia, and that certainly plays a part of it, but I think there's more to it. And if you haven't seen any of my prior Sonic videos, or you don't know anything about Sonic games, well, go watch my previous videos, or better yet, play the game. Because we're not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining the basics, and this will get very confusing very quickly if you don't understand the important relationship between jewelry and multicolored woodland critters and stylish footwear. But this is Game Apologist, or a spin-off of Game Apologist. So like every other game we cover, or well, some of the other games we cover, before we get into the good, we should look at the bad. While I do believe this game is a masterpiece, nothing is perfect. So let's get into it. Alright, now that we have that out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. It's right here, just past this weird barrel. We just hop on and, okay, hang on a second. We just, okay. Nope, that's, no, hang on, nope, I mean, and do I jump? Or do I? Okay, this is, alright, I mean, seriously though, do I jump? This stupid fox is jumping, what, what is this stupid barrel doing here? This doesn't make any sense. There's nowhere else in the rest of the game. I don't understand why we're... Hey, no. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. Put that title card away. No. Alright, fine. The game is sprinkled with odd little mechanics and mechanisms that don't really serve much purpose, this barrel being the most offensive culprit. For the most part, I don't see these as a negative, they're just mostly useless, as some of these can actually be kind of fun. It goes back to those jungle gym and playground comparisons I was making in previous episodes. And while this barrel is annoying, some fans do find issue with some other zones, so instead of talking about it right now, we're gonna wait till we talk about it when we cover that zone. So let's just do this level by level, because I have a lot to talk about with this game. Before we do that, anything else bad we should mention up front? Well, multiplayer's here. Wouldn't call it bad, it's just nothing to write home about. And I wish this roller coaster theme was made into a proper level, but that's all I really got. I think you just race or something. I don't know, man. It's an afterthought, and I'm not gonna waste my time talking about it. The only other crap I could really talk about is, well, Sonic 3 doesn't really hit its full potential unless you slap the and knuckles on the end there. When Sonic 3 was originally released, I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade at the time, and I didn't really look at this stuff with a critical eye. And I knew I loved what I played, but I distinctly remember my first experience being, well, underwhelming. And as I'd find out half a year later, there was more to this game, on another game, which I would get as a Christmas present. Thing is, I had only rented Sonic 3. I liked it fine, but I didn't really feel the need to ask for it as a gift for Christmas since, well, I already beaten it as a rental, and there was a brand spanking new Sonic game I had yet to play. So I had a lot of experience playing Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles as their own games. And they were great, but again, both feel a little incomplete. It's when I finally rented Sonic 3 again and combined the two games that I realized there was something truly special here. And it's true, you could pop out Sonic 3 and then swap out carts and play Part 2 with Sonic and Knuckles, but it's really not the same experience. They not only fuse the two games, but they bring in features exclusive on each cart to the other, and unlock a couple of other cool things not available on either until you combine them into one. But why would they do something like this? Were they just trying to make more money? Well, I mean, potentially. The story goes that the combined games are the true version of Sonic 3. They just ran out of development time, so they cut their losses, released Sonic 3 as it was, and then spent the rest of the time creating the rest of the game. And honestly, I think we're better for it. Now, I only bring this up because, well, I don't know. I guess it comes down to whether or not you feel each half needs to stand on its own. And if this two-part tactic was pulled off in today's market, would we be alright with it? I mean, considering the other tactics the game industry is pulling off, this doesn't seem so offensive. Now, I've gone on about this because I cannot stress enough that you really need to play Sonic 3 and Knuckles to fully understand why so many of us hold this title in such high regard. But that doesn't mean either of these carts don't stand on their own, or have unique values in each title that can be appreciated without the presence of the other. And Sonic 3 by itself only feels underwhelming because of that extensive wonder that was Sonic 2. On its own, still pretty awesome. I've spent enough time in the other videos talking about the core gameplay of Sonic and why I love it so much. They turned a pinball table into a platformer, and they made it work by giving you direct control of the pinball. But like an actual table, you did have to relinquish a little bit of control and bank on a bit of luck thanks to that iconic speed of the series. Unless you've had a bit of practice, it was only a matter of time before you ran your black olive nose into a robot or a spike pit. Sonic 1, being the first game out of the gate, would sometimes relinquish Sonic's speed and give you more traditional platformer levels. Going forward, Sonic 2 does design levels to take full advantage of the speed, and CD at the same time made players actively seek out spaces to build and maintain momentum to activate the unique time travel mechanic. Sonic 2 was more about speed, and Sonic CD was more about exploration. So while all these games are similar, you can see why you'll get varied answers when you ask a classic Sonic fan which one is their favorite. They all tackle the simple gameplay in wonderfully different ways. But Sonic 3 and Knuckles takes the very best ideas from all these games and improves upon them. The level designs, the characters, the graphics, the music, bonus stages, oh man, there's a lot to cover here. But since we're taking this level by level, let's just talk about the mechanics as a new player would discover them. Okay, so you pop this sucker into your Genesis, you turn it on, and the first thing you see is, oh, holy cow. I don't know what it is about the Sonic model, but his big giant balloon head always kind of weirded me out when I was a kid. Anyway, you hit start, and you see something we've never had before in the series: save files. This already was a huge plus for me as a kid. I was sick and tired of trying to play these games all at once. And you don't have to hop into some irritating options menu to go pick out your character. You can play Sonic and Tails, or you can play each of them on their own. And while I've ragged on Tails' design in the past, they've actually made him pretty useful this time around. He can actually fly this time, which is incredibly helpful in this game considering the huge emphasis on exploration. Because of this, he's considered the easy mode. I mean, he can fly over so many problems, it's not even funny. So I'm not going to play him here. But if you're new to the game or you're trying to hunt down emeralds, he's an awesome starting choice. Sonic, on the other hand, hasn't changed a whole lot, which it's fine by me. Don't fix what's not broken. The only difference now is he has this weird little flash if you hit the jump button a second time when he's in the air. And for the longest time, I kind of felt it was useless as a kid, but when I played any of the game without it, felt a little naked. This quick little flash can give you a little bit more of a hitbox and can reflect some projectiles if you're quick enough. It actually feels kind of awesome if you get the hang of it. But once you pick your character, you then see something we've never seen on the Genesis games before: a cutscene. But we've seen it done before in Sonic CD, so why make us think about it now? Well, that's because this is as perfect of a storytelling device as you could hope for a Sonic game. It doesn't require you to read through a manual, text boxes, or listen to tinny little voices. It tells you everything you need to know in an easy to understand format and gets you on your way. And it works for Sonic because it doesn't waste your time, something that sadly would be a problem in later games. And they managed to improve upon it from CD by not smacking it in the second zone or giving the player a chance to run headlong into spikes. Man. It was obvious they wanted their players invested on a deeper level for this adventure. Simply having this cutscene exist is all they needed to make that intention clear. So let's break it down. They start things off by dangling the ultimate prize of the last game, Super Sonic, right there at the get-go. This tells fans a couple of things. 1, there is continuity from the previous game. And 2, it's also about to tell you why you won't be starting off your adventure with that shiny gold upgrade. And at the same time, if you hadn't played Sonic 2, or maybe just never got all the emeralds, which was a real possibility, speaking out of experience, this tells those players why these shiny gems matter and the potential prize they unlock. And then,
boom! Get that out of here! Island justice! Not Knuckles House! I don't think so, boy!
An island native comes and robs our spiky blue tourist of all he's worth. This cutscene also establishes just how much of a threat this new red dude is. Granted, this is played up a little bit and would eventually just be another furry fun buddy that would be running around with Sonic as the series progressed. But back in 1994, Knuckles the Echidna punched his way onto the scene in a big, bad way. Now, at this point, as the game was new, we didn't know a whole lot about Knuckles. So for now, we're only going to analyze what the game is giving us in these few seconds. But thankfully, there's a lot we can glean from this. Knuckles keeps that simple but striking design the Hedgehog is so famous for. He gets his own radical primary color, and his crimson fur displays the intensity and aggression of his persona. Instead of a mohawk, he gets dreadlocks. And while his eye design is kind of similar to Sonic, they're not as wide as his, giving him this constant leering look. He looks like a bit of a bully. I mean, he introduces himself with a fist in your mouth and then cackles about it. His actions, expressions, and design help establish this persona. This nasty little guy mugs you and then runs off into the forest, giving you all the incentive you need to give chase. And just like that, we're off and ready to go. That one little cutscene told us all of that within seconds, making this long, rambling explanation completely pointless. And here's some other stuff you don't need me to point out, but I'm gonna do it anyway. The game looks and sounds fantastic. I know I'm being biased here, but as far as graphics and artistic design goes, I think this game is unrivaled on the Genesis. You have to appreciate the capabilities of a video game machine that came out in 1989 to really get a kick out of what you're seeing and hearing. This game is a technical wonder. As good as the previous Sonic games looked, they were nothing like this. The developers are just showing off what they can do. The music in this first level invokes a tropical vibe to go along with the lush environment. They want you to relax, take this all in, enjoy yourself. Check out these fun little swings. Boop, fell down into the ravine? No worries, you're gonna land just fine. Heck, you might even find some nifty secrets if you're curious enough. Like I said, there's a much larger emphasis on exploration than compared to Sonic 2, but without it being a chore like it could be in Sonic CD. It's fun, you get awesome rewards, and the layout makes sense and is filled with recognizable landmarks, meaning you probably won't get lost. Like the previous games, this one starts you off in a more natural world, but it doesn't look like another repeat of Green Hill Zone. Angel Island feels completely unique compared to every other starting level that's come before, but still keeps the same basic theme and all the strengths of the previous level designs. And then halfway through the first act, as if they didn't put enough emphasis on how different things would be this time around, they literally set your world on fire. Just as you were getting used to this fun, colorful jungle setting, the game shows you just how real the threat of Robotnik and his robot army are to you and this island, as well as letting you know not to expect the same challenges between acts, even within the same zone. The remainder of your time here will be navigating the forest as it burns down around you, and the music, while keeping that same tropical theme, becomes desperate. The traps and enemies become a little bit more hazardous, but despite all that, the game is still teaching you some stuff, like this brilliant little teaser in the form of puddles. See, in the past Sonic games, water has been a bit of an issue. Sonic Team had established some fairly unique mechanics for Sonic's water traversal, and that in turn changes up the gameplay. Problem is, fans don't usually like water levels, and they certainly didn't like how they were handled in the first Sonic game. Showed up for one level, required you to trudge through it for 3 grueling acts, then again in a shoddy final level, but otherwise it remained untouched. Sonic CD refined that a bit, but it's basically Labyrinth Zone all over again. Sonic 2 would tackle these issues by putting it in some stressful spots in Chemical Plant, and as a punishment if you take the lower path in Aquatic Ruin, but again, there's not a whole lot of it in the game, and if you're good enough, you probably won't see it at all. Sonic 3, on the other hand, finally found the right balance with the water, making it a smart challenge without overstaying its welcome or making it an underwhelming afterthought. Here in this first level, you have chances to get submerged in tiny spots, and really only one you have to navigate through before you run out of air. This helps new players dip their red shoes into this mechanic, and it also gives you a chance to play around with all 3 elemental shields, another new feature for this game. Now, all the shields still have the same function they had before, giving you a free hit without losing any rings, but now they come with some additional abilities, and some available only to Sonic. You have the electric shield, which magnetically grabs nearby rings and draws them toward your player character, as well as giving Sonic an extra jump ability. Or the fire shield, which protects you from fire and lava, and gives Sonic a horizontal fireball attack. And the bubble shield, which lets you survive underwater without drowning, and gives Sonic an extra bounce. The first zone has a generous abundance of all 3 varieties, and ample chances to experiment with them and figure out how they work. You can see the extent of their abilities and vulnerabilities all within this level. There's always going to be rings around you to take advantage of the electric shield. You're in a burning forest, you're bound to find some use for that fire shield, and like I mentioned just a minute ago, you even have little spots of water to play around with the bubble shield. And these also show you how well fire and electricity work with water. And while this is just a tiny detail, the game wants you aware of what shield you are bringing into what environment. They even subtly designed challenges around this. Even in this first zone, the fire shield comes in handy as early as that first mini-boss encounter. Normally you'd have to dodge this flamethrower, but with the right shield, the fight's over in seconds. And it's oh so satisfying to take down the machine that wrecked this paradise. Well, one of them, anyway. As you can see, if you're paying attention to the background when things were first set ablaze, the sky is filled with machines just like this one. And this guy was just a mini-boss. Oh, and that reminds me, if you had played previous Sonic games before, this is another new thing we have. Mini-bosses at the end of the first acts. Before this, you'd just zip through a signpost, maybe grab a giant ring, and wait for the next stage to pop up. Here, the game just gets you right back into the action. And again, if you're a seasoned player, you might have noticed the bonus stages aren't acting the same way either. The star post will get you into a bonus area, but you can't grab emeralds here. Just rings, extra lives, shields, stuff like that. When I was much younger and still fairly fresh to gaming, these things would be a lifesaver in a pinch, but they still require you to have some rings before they'd grant passage. So collecting a certain amount of rings is still important. But no matter how many you collect, the end of the act doesn't have a giant ring waiting for you no matter how many of its smaller counterparts you've collected. As you've probably noticed by the time you got to this point in the stage, the special stage rings are actually hidden within the levels this time around, giving you the biggest incentive to explore. And if you've somehow missed every single one of them up to this point, the game will actually force you through a tunnel, blasting you through rock walls and smack dab into a giant ring, making sure everybody knows that these giant rings exist, and yes, sometimes you have to run through some walls. And the special stages themselves are also completely different from every other version from the previous games. It does continue the tradition of a more 3D behind the back approach, and if you don't know what you're doing, this can be a little frustrating at first. It took me a little while as a kid to wrap my head around how these things work. You collect blue spheres, but you can't touch the red ones, but the blue spheres will turn into red ones once you touch them, and they have a lot of these suckers set up in fields. And if you didn't know that collecting only the outer perimeter of the spheres turns them all into rings, you might find yourself a bit frustrated. And if you were a dumb kid like me and you didn't understand for the longest time that Sonic doesn't move freely, but actually makes sharp 90-degree turns on a grid pattern, yeah, it can be a bit annoying if you're a dumb babe. But once you understand the rules, this is by far the best of the classic special stages, requiring a lot less dumb luck, but still a good amount of quick thinking and fast reaction. It requires you to think your problems through instead of memorization and constant failure. And even if you do screw up, the zones are littered with giant rings, giving you plenty of chances to figure these things out until you finally have the skill necessary to be rewarded with the coveted Chaos Emerald. You get taught all of these mechanics, old and new, within this first zone. And we still haven't even come to the encounter with Robotnik, which is an awesome introduction compared to previous games. You first get chased down by an airship raining down missiles, then you see your enemy looming in the background through the trees, and then finally bursting through a waterfall, burning down the bridge to make sure you can't escape, all while within this intimidating machine, reflecting the fiery aftermath of his attack just off screen. Like I said, they do a great job of establishing the threat of Knuckles and Robotnik all within this first zone. They teach you all of this regardless of the character you play. Like I mentioned before, Tails can take full advantage of his abilities here, and we'll get to Knuckles in due time, because again, at this point, we had no idea we could play him here, but the developers still plan for him in the future. He can take his unique skills to brand new places here as well. What I find interesting is despite all these new ways you can navigate the environments, it never deviates away from the core simplicity Yuji Naka strove for since the original Sonic game. All you ever need is the directional pad and a single button to accomplish anything. Jumping, flying, gliding, climbing, spin dashing, any of Sonic's 3 shield abilities. They manage so much with so little. Now, if you've never played this game before and it sounds like a good time, I recommend just stopping here and playing for yourself. I doubt it'll be quite as impressive to a newcomer as it was to a little kid in 1994, but you should experience this all the same. I just wanted to talk about how great of an introduction this particular zone was compared to other games, and it certainly doesn't fall victim to the claim that Sonic games go downhill after the first zone. You will get wildly unique environments and challenges with each and every act in this adventure. Once the first zone is done, the game throws you right into the pool that is Hydrocity, or Hydro City. Do we have an official word on what that actually is supposed to be? You know what? Doesn't matter. Sega can't even keep their own canon straight. Who cares? Now, what's interesting about this level is, while Sonic 1 made the water zone a challenge halfway through the game, and Sonic 2 made water avoidable if you were good enough, Sonic 3... well, you remember how I said the first zone kinda lets you doggy paddle in the kiddie pool? Well, I hope you learn to adapt, because the second zone's just gonna shove you right into the deep end. At least the other games let you jump in at your own leisure for the most part. Third game's like... well, good luck! You have to admire how they took one of the most complained about components of the previous games and just shoved your face in it and gave you a swirly. And maybe you don't hop in your own leisure like you do in Labyrinth Zone, but you very quickly learn that this level is way more fun than Labyrinth ever was. It's not without its hazards, but thanks to great level design and that fantastic bubble shield, the theme park that is the Sonic Zones finally added a water park that's fun to splash around in. And speaking of theme parks, they actually use a carnival theme for... Alright, fine, we can't skip Marble Garden. Sonic's never had the best luck with Marble theme levels. I mean, the level's fine, but it feels like the weak link in the lineup. There are a lot of silly gimmicks through the level, including fake springs, crushing columns, a giant morning star that greets you right at the start of the level. Hey, how you doing?
Island Justice!
And this annoying spinning top thing. Now, these are fine if somewhat frustrating or, again, useless. It's not going to break the experience. It can just feel somewhat jarring compared to all the loop-de-loops. And I don't think Marble Garden is quite as bad as people make it out to be, but it's not the best either. I honestly feel like you're going to have a better time playing this level as Knuckles or Tails as opposed to Sonic, considering how vertical this entire thing is. But this level does not get anywhere near the grief Carnival Knight does. You come in expecting something like Casino Night, which, when I think about it, feels pretty out of place compared to the rest of Sonic 2. 2 and much more in line with something you'd find in Sonic 3, but in comparison, Carnival feels cramped and linear, which is crazy when you consider just how much time you're going to spend traversing this zone. And this is, of course, where we come across the barrel. And yes, geeks, I know, it's super easy when you know what to do, and some of you figured it out so quick, and we're so proud of you. But that's not the point. It's bad game design in an otherwise beautifully crafted experience. The game doesn't do a great job teaching the player how to tackle this obstacle because, well, there's nothing like this anywhere else in the adventure. And there are other barrels prior to this one, but a majority of the time they don't share the same physics as this one. So what's the problem with it? Well, a lot of us new kids at the time got to this barrel and just couldn't figure out how to get past it. You'd play around with it for a bit and it just wouldn't go anywhere. And if you're playing with Tails, you notice he's jumping up and down on it. So a lot of us felt like, okay, well, obviously it's pushing down quite a bit when he jumps on it, so obviously I just have to do that. And you could do this to the point where you could start seeing the rest of the level, when in fact, all you had to do was press up and down on the directional pad to get a swinging motion going. Normally, this is something I would shrug off, because really, yeah, once you calm down and just push up and down, you're gonna get the idea. Sonic can only do so much, you're bound to figure it out eventually. And once you know the simple trick, it's right back to the fun. But I distinctly remember the first time I came across this as a kid, and it was beyond frustrating. And honestly, I'm kinda glad to know that other people out there had that same frustration. And yes, guys, I have seen that barrel mug, and yes, I do want it. That is a brilliant piece of merchandising. All that rambling aside, I really love how this level looks. The screenshots for this place were the first thing that caught my eye when I was waiting for this game to come out. And I still love the aesthetic. Outside of the barrel, it's still a pretty fun time. There's a lot of cool stuff happening here. Despite the stupid barrel, still one of my favorite levels. From here, we get Ice Cap Zone, a fan favorite, and for very good reason. This is one of the only tolerable ice-themed levels in just about any game of that era. And that's probably because they don't have any slippery physics, which is a commonplace for platformers. And that's not to say there aren't clever ice-based hazards and designs, but it's really well put together. A nice balance between platforming and speed. Gorgeous aesthetic, fantastic music, all around A+. After that is the final level of Sonic 3, Launch Base. And you can see in the background the behemoth Star Wars reference that is the Death Egg. Now these games have always done a fantastic job using the backgrounds of zones in creative ways, and it's now also a storytelling device, as you noticed with the firebombing earlier in the game. But here, you move closer and closer to the Death Egg as you go on. And as you can see, it's in the water, and as the level carries on, you eventually will be as well. And this is something I should point out. Not only do they do a much better job of implementing the water mechanics, but they have more water than any other classic Sonic game. Outside of Marble Garden, there is water in every single stage. Obviously, they wanted to show off that nifty bubble shield, but I thought it was interesting that there's more water than ever, but somehow nobody ever talks about it being a problem, when I hear about it non-stop when talking about Sonic 1 or 2. Looking back on it now, I have to give Sonic Team a hand for completely turning around my views on such a notorious mechanic. Anyway, back to the level at hand. All around, it's a fun time. But again, if you're playing Sonic 3 on its own, there's nothing here that indicates this is the final stage. Nothing feels imminent or desperate, and the music's fairly chill. It's not even close to being the most challenging level of this game. It's not until the very end of the level do we see some shakeups to let the player know that things are going down. Knuckles started off this adventure by being a mugger, and has graduated to a full-on terrorist as he just takes down an entire building with a bomb in an attempt to murder Sonic. Right after that, you have a fairly standard fight with Robotnik, and then you jump into his hovercraft. Okay, well, from here you confront Knuckles finally. Not how I expected it to go. So imagine it's 1994. Sonic and Knuckles hasn't even been announced yet. You're playing through this game for the first time, and this little red rat man has been bothering you this entire time through this whole adventure. And it culminates in this weird cutscene. This is pathetic. The player never interacts with him directly. And all that's left is a tacked-on battle with Robotnik and a sonic screwdriver and gropey hands. And after all that build-up to the Death Egg through this entire level, we just see it falling out of the sky without ever really doing anything. Previously, Sonic had to fight a robotic double of himself in a giant mech Robotnik without any rings in the Death Egg. And in CD, he had an incredible race against Metal Sonic before storming the challenging final fortress that was Metal Madness. Even the first Sonic game had a sense of drama as you stormed an industrial death trap only to be thrown into an underground ruin you had to fight your way through. Here, Sonic doesn't even make it into the Death Egg. Knuckles finally punches something, does no damage, falls in the water, and I guess everything's fine. I remember when Sonic 3 first came out. I could not wait to play it. I fell instantly in love with this new art style. I loved the aesthetic of the zones, and it finally had a bonus stage that I could beat with enough practice. It was prettier than Sonic 2, no doubt about it, but like I said right at the front of this video, I could tell something was missing. On its own, Sonic 3 is a fantastic game that's missing some of that endgame flair that really made Sonic 2 shine. But if you treat it as a midway point for an even bigger adventure, well, that's something else entirely. And to follow in that game's amazing footsteps, we're gonna have to wait a little while before we tackle the second half of this game. Toot toot, Sonic Warriors. Welcome back to Unapologetic, where we look for the good in good games. We've gone through all of Sonic 3, or, well, at least the Sonic 3 that lies within the cart named Sonic 3. But it's no secret that the second half of the game lies within today's title, Sonic and Knuckles. And since that was released on its own, we're going to take a look at what was provided in the box when this was first launched in October of 1994. And speaking of the box, this was the only one of the classic Sonic games that came in a cardboard box instead of the plastic clamshell like all the other games, and it just bothers me. Also, you might notice how minimalistic this box art is compared to the older titles. Clearly had some Batman fans among the graphic designers. Anyway, we open the sucker up and oh my. Did I buy a Game Shark or a video game? What is this thing? Looks like yet another add-on for the Sega Genesis. Have we not learned our lesson yet? This thick black mushroom head of a game cartridge was actually the means to use the heavily advertised lock-on technology that lets you fuse this game with previous Sonic games, which we're not talking about today. Let's see what this cart offers on its own. The title screen has changed from previous Sonic games as well. Sonic has ditched his iconic star-laden ring and ribbon and now stands next to Knuckles.
Hey, look! It's those guys! It's those guys with the names! It's those guys!
But once you get the game going, you're gonna see that it's actually pretty familiar, despite all this brand new slick packaging and lock-on technology. That is, of course, because this was a direct continuation from the last game. And since they were designed to be one game, it needs to be as seamless as possible when combining the two carts. But that said, this particular cartridge still offers a lot of fun on its own. Now, if you start with Sonic, you get right into it. No intro like Angel Island, but by this point you should probably understand how this works, so get to it. But if you've been waiting to try this cool new Knuckles guy all year, well, this is where things change up quite a bit. Knuckles gets his own cutscene, one you can only view when playing SNK on its own. Knuckles, as you'd expect, plays pretty similarly to Sonic and Tails. The major difference is he can glide and climb on walls. And while I've heard other reviewers say that he's just as fast as Sonic is, that's not the case. It's barely noticeable, but in critical moments you're going to notice that Knuckles doesn't jump quite as high as Sonic, doesn't move quite as quickly. And while Tails does fly, Knuckles gliding just feels cooler. See, when you're playing Tails, you have to hit that button over and over and over again to keep his propeller tails moving. But with Knuckles, just jump, hit jump again, and you're off. And sure, he doesn't elevate, but the transition from the ground to gliding to hitting a wall and climbing the side of it, it all merges together pretty seamlessly, and it feels really good. You're gonna see in all the zones going forward, and even back in Sonic 3, that a lot of this was designed around Knuckles and the way he moves. Granted, you can still zip through all these stages as Sonic without any issue, but it's pretty cool that you can take similar mechanics in the exact same environment and explore it in a different way. And you'd think with this added versatility that Knuckles would be an easier time to play with, but that's not the case. Knuckles is the hard mode of the game. The developers anticipated that experienced Sonic players would want to try something new, and they certainly gave it to us. He gets his own paths to explore, filled with a whole bunch of traps that Sonic just could not navigate on his own. The boss battles are a little more aggressive, and you'll see some other things as we go on, so let's keep going. Let's get to the zones. Mushroom Hill is the first of Sonic and Knuckles levels. As a starting zone, it's nowhere near as dramatic or memorable as Angel Island, but for a standard starting zone in a Sonic game, it's a lot of fun. Now, there are some fairly pointless mechanics on occasion, but I consider this a jungle gym for newer players. This teaches kids to explore and interact with the environment in different ways. And I know I've pointed this out in the past, but I feel like a lot of people looking back on this decades-old game kind of forget that so much of what makes classic Sonic a great time is how he interacts with his environment. Not everything needs a super specific purpose. Sometimes it's just fun to bounce around, and Mushroom Hill is a nice, dense area full of places to explore and fun little things to interact with. I think this is a charming level, and I enjoy how the seasons change between acts. Or maybe it's just the forced dying. I've heard that interpretation as well. Can floating islands support temperate force? This zone is a nice callback to previous hill levels, and yet it still has a completely different style from Green or Emerald Hill. I've seen a lot of people complaining about how the game shifts from high speeds to stop-and-go gameplay. Most of this comes together just fine, and informs me that levels will probably require me to do things out of the ordinary as this adventure progresses. And while we're here, the bonus levels, while laid out differently, act exactly as they did before. You hop into a giant ring and grab blue balls. I'm too lazy to make that into a crude joke, so let me know what you come up with in the comments down below. I'm just kidding, please don't. The internet has enough of Sonic's blue balls. And never mind, couldn't even avoid a joke when I was trying. From here we get to Flying Battery. This level feels like it wanted to take Winged Fortress and expand on a lot of the ideas presented in Sonic 2, and they did just that. This level is fast-paced, high-flying fun, full of unique mechanics and challenges, without being as nail-biting or frustrating as Winged Fortress could be for players who are unfamiliar with that zone. Something else I also found interesting was how the level also feels like we finally get to see a bit of the behind-the-scenes of Robotnik's operation. The level is filled with animal pods you normally would see at the end of stages, but they're instead filled with rings or robots, giving you a risk-reward feel every time you jump on top of these things. Is this what turns these little critters into robots? I don't know. I just appreciate the little bit of world building this level does, as do many other zones as we carry on. It's honestly no wonder this is a fan favorite level. But we then follow up with Sandopolis Zone, and like the game itself, we're gonna be spending some time here. This is, hands down, the most disliked level in the entire adventure. There's a lot of stop-and-go gameplay, stressful time challenges, somewhat frustrating puzzles, and this first act, I feel sunburnt just looking at this place. Now, I actually have to give them props for making a 16-bit game look and feel so uncomfortable. This does a good job making you feel like you're in a desert, and I feel like the Stone Guardian mini-boss was pretty clever for a first-time player. This mysterious and intimidating golem is obviously not a robot, and I think this makes this our first non-Robotnik enemy in the game. The first time you come across this thing, you quickly realize that your attacks aren't really doing anything, and when you finally realize what you have to do to defeat it, you feel like a clever little devil. But on repeat playthroughs, yeah, you're gonna have to be patient for a minute. This mid-boss is also a preview of what lies ahead. Within this pyramid lies the most complaints players have about this game. This is also a point in the game that lets you know that whether or not you agree or disagree that Sonic and Knuckles' story takes place at the same time or one after the other, thanks to this zone, we can at least definitively say that Sonic was here first. Because while you're rolling through the pyramid, you're gonna hit one of Robotnik's little egg pods that usually holds animals, which instead now holds angry Batman masks. Yeah, you're gonna have ghosts hovering around you throughout the rest of this level. And looking at them now, wouldn't these have been great to put in for the Sonic Batman crossover? Anyway, they seem harmless, even cute at first. But you'll notice as the lights start to dim, the ghosts grow larger. And if you remember, at the start of this area, you had to grab onto a pulley to bring the lights back up, and trust me, you do not want those lights to go out. This mechanic is only found in this one act, but it does a good job of easing the player into the function of the ghosts and the lights. It's very easy to understand if you're playing Sonic. You see, if you were, like me, real excited to start the game with Knuckles, when you get to this level,
Oh, what is that? What is happening? These games don't have dead things? Why are there dead things? It's so dark in here. Batman's mask has joined the clan and it's pissed as hell.
there really is a lot of Batman in this game. So like I said, you're gonna have to go from lever to lever to keep these ghosts at bay. But in between, you also have to cope with a lot of time-based challenges, lever puzzles, spike pits, rising sand, this confusing sand slide transfer, and you only have 10 minutes to do all of this. I hit the time limit a lot as a kid, and I can understand the frustration so many people have with this level. It has the anxiety of the underwater bits from the past games through this entire area without any of the water. But I don't think any of this is badly designed. Far from it. This feels like you're actually in a booby-trapped pyramid, like an Indiana Jones adventure done Sonic style. This game gives you new challenges on every step of your journey. I love how varied it can be. And as a kid, I love being surprised with each new zone. I was never bored. And I also appreciate this level of challenge isn't stretched into 2 or 3 acts, because if this had been Sonic CD, this would have been a real messy nightmare. They knew they were giving players a challenge, and it was smart to keep the ghosts and the rising sand portions left in this single act. And carrying on from here, we get to Lava Reef, which is filled with... hang on. I left my notes here somewhere. Lava Reef is filled with, Stuff glows. It's fiery. Molten rock. Oh yeah, here it is. Lava! But this isn't your run-of-the-mill volcano level. Clearly Robotnik is mining for something here. And they mix these two themes quite well. And probably comes as no surprise, you should probably grab a fire shield here. The second act sees the lava cool and harden. And what was once orange and fiery is now cool blue and serene. I adore this zone. And once again, have to give props to the drastic shift between these two acts, because this feels like a brand new level. Like the launch-based zone prior, this again tells the story through the background. Early on, we see the Death Egg in the distance, once again letting us know that we're drawing in on our destination. And at the end of the zone, we're right next to the thing as we see power return. And unlike Launch Base, we no longer have a chill beat playing as we casually coast our way over to Robotnik's ride. We now have to survive a barrage of missiles in an environment where lava looks hotter than ever, and then take on Robotnik in another awesome boss fight. This all does a brilliant job letting you know that you're heading into the final stretch of your adventure. And this is not going to go the way things did back in Launch Base. As Star Wars has taught us, Knuckles has the high ground and clearly the advantage. You're in no easy position to reach the Death Egg this time. You're basically surviving hell. It's awesome. From here, we get to the Hidden Palace zone, and it's barely a zone at that. Regardless, I love it. When playing Knuckles, this just transfers you to the arena where you're gonna have your final boss fight. But when playing as Sonic, this is where things really start to pick up for the final stretch of the game. It's here where we finally come head to head with Knuckles. And, well, it's over pretty quickly. Regardless, this was a big deal to a lot of us at the time. There's no walls between the two of you, no traps. Finally, after all of this time, you can take down this jerk who has been a pain in your side since you arrived on this island. The setting is grand, and while it's relatively easy, we've never had a fight like this in a Sonic game before. Again, not much of a challenge, but this is only the start of the final leg of the adventure, and things only get crazier from here. Hidden Palace is the home of the Master Emerald, and we now understand what Robotnik's been digging up this whole time. Knuckles realizes he's been duped, and worn out from the battle with Sonic and Robotnik's attacks, he turns to our spiky hero for assistance, and uses his last bit of energy to bring Sonic to Sky's Sanctuary. As the level begins, the game impedes our movement to show us the parting clouds revealing the dreaded Death Star. Egg. The Death Egg. Finally functioning at full power. No matter how many times we put it back on the ground, it seems that Robotnik has finally won. We see little shapes launching from it, and we'll find out what those are soon enough. I love this level. I love it so much. I love the theme, I love the platforming, I love the storytelling through the background. I love how they tell you this is a sacred land, because obviously this is both Sonic's first time here, and Robotnik is only now invading this area with the arrival of these creepy robots that look a lot like him. And I love it's only a single act and not a full zone, not letting you linger here too long and building up the anticipation of the final confrontation on the Death Egg. And I absolutely adore the boss of this world. Yes, kids, we have our third Sonic robot. This is what the fanbase usually calls Mecha Sonic. Through the level, he will attack you in callback fights from Sonic 1 and 2, and then finally decides to take you on himself in the final encounter before the Death Egg. I absolutely adored his design as a kid. At times, it was probably my favorite of the robot doubles. And as I grew older, that ultimately went to Metal Sonic. But don't get me wrong, just because I have a favorite and I feel Metal makes way more sense as a copy of Sonic, Mecha Sonic is still awesome, and it breaks my heart that we've only ever seen him here. Even the Archie comic series was canceled right before we were about to get a proper introduction to this guy. Now, Mecha Sonic is basically just another retread of Silver Sonic's fight, and is technically easier because he got rings and he's not shooting out spikes, but he still plays a very important role and made a lasting impression on players, not because of his fight with Sonic, but because of his battle with Knuckles. Now, putting and Knuckles on everything might be a meme nowadays, but it was fitting for this half of the adventure. With the introduction of Knuckles as a playable character, this game puts a lot of focus on the Master Emerald and its role in this island's ecosystem. The Emeralds play a central role in the narrative. This game puts more effort into telling a story than ever before. I mean, we've always known that Chaos Emeralds mattered, thanks to game manuals, good endings, and a nifty unlockable transformation, but here, they're kind of adding to the world building, and that's all thanks to Knuckles. We'll get back to Sonic in a minute, but I think it's about time we talk about the Echidna, as his journey ends here in Sky's Sanctuary. And if you're only playing as Sonic, well, the last time you see the guy is him catching his breath on top of a giant button. Knuckles is the guardian of the Master Emerald, and you learn this without ever needing to be told as such. When you play as Knuckles, you will see that he gets shortcuts that Sonic and Tails just aren't able to access. This not only lets developers make areas specifically designed for Knuckles, but also lets the player know that this is his home. He knows it inside and out. Even in the zone transitions, Sonic is usually forced from zone to zone. And at the same time, often you'll just see Knuckles transfer to the same areas with no problem. Like I said up front, even with the shortcuts and versatility of his climbing and gliding, Knuckles is considered the hard mode of the game. Not just in challenging segments made specifically for him, but again for the boss fights. Knuckles' journey is a little more challenging, even if his adventure ends a whole zone before Sonic's. But it's here, at the end of the adventure, in Sky Sanctuary, do we discover that Mecha Sonic had survived the encounter with his fleshy double, and now it's up to Knuckles to take him out. The first part of the fight plays out like it did with Sonic, but in a surprise turn, once he's defeated, Mecha gets back up and uses the Master Emerald's power to attain his own super form. And this is the final fight for Knuckles in the game. Awesome for so many reasons. Super forms are awesome, the fight's really cool, and we discover that robots can actually attain super forms. So basically, it's up to Knuckles to fight a robotic version of Super Sonic. Knuckles can be kind of an idiot, and because of that, he actively helped the man who was out to steal the Master Emerald, all while trying to impede what turned out to be the hero of the story. And to make matters worse, Sonic not only surpassed all of Knuckles' traps, but hands him his red tuchus when they finally face off. But it's here, in this final fight, do we see why Knuckles is the guardian of the Master Emerald, as he redeems himself on 2 levels. First and foremost, this is a robotic double of Sonic, and it can be seen as making up for that pathetic display against the real Hedgehog. And secondly, if this does actually take place after Sonic's adventure, that means that technically, Knuckles is the one to finally end the threat of Robotnik on his home turf. Knuckles is the only character to face off against a super-formed enemy in any of the classic games. And as a kid, I originally thought that this was kind of a cheap way to end his story. Looking back on it now, I think it's kind of fantastic. I'm glad his adventures remained on Angel Island and the adjacent Sky Sanctuary, leading Sonic to deal with Robotnik on the machine that had been plaguing the planet since the second game. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is the final level of the game, the Death Egg. Unlike Sonic 2, which we only explore 2 rooms with frustrating ringless boss fights, we finally get to see the insane innards of this floating fortress. The challenges are varied, and it puts all of your skills to the test, but without ever being as frustrating as the likes of Metallic Madness or Metropolis Zone. There is enough here to make this a worthy final level, and one that really lets you know how dangerous Robotnik's crazy machine can be. Like the rest of the levels, Death Egg will take you on a journey. The end of the zone looks nothing like the beginning. As you'll see, the egg has risen up into the stratosphere as you make your way through it, leading to the final encounter of the game. The final fight with Robotnik requires you to manipulate gravity, a mechanic we've been introduced to earlier on in the Death Egg zone, which immediately leads to facing off with a Death Egg robot that proves to be much larger than the one in Sonic 2. I mean, Sonic's so small he can only attack the fingers at first, which then leads to this thing flat out chasing you. And if it's your first time here, it might take you a few minutes before you figure out what you need to do. And just for a quick second, I really love the boss fights in this game. Sure, you can spam some of them without any issue, but Sonic Team found some clever ways to keep you from cheesing the fight, whether it be putting a barrier between you and Robotnik on occasion, or having you chase him down through a forest, or in this case, having him chase you. And speaking of this fight, once you finally figure out how to expose a weakness, you discover that the Master Emerald has been weaponized against you. Robotnik has harnessed its energy, and you literally have to attack the thing to do any damage. You hit it enough, and the robot goes down. But still not over. This nasty egg boy still won't give up the goods. Even with the Death Egg falling apart, he still makes one last desperate attempt to run off with the emerald. Sonic needs to smack it out of his greedy mitts without falling to his death. But we're still not done here. Already, this is more boss battle than we've ever had before in the series. But if you've collected all the emeralds, you unlock the true final encounter. And man, it is just the best. For the first time in a Sonic game, having all the emeralds unlocks a final level and a boss fight that only Sonic, powered by the emeralds, could hope to survive. We have Sonic launching through asteroids in a mad dash to stop Robotnik from running off with the emerald. And even though the transformation makes the rest of the game a cakewalk, here, they made it a challenge, demanding the player to take control of this crazy power and take out Robotnik before you run out of rings. Sure, you're invincible, but you still have asteroids to move around, you need to catch up with the robot, you need to figure out how to damage him, and then you need to take on his secondary form, all while keeping track of how many rings you have left. What a setting. What a brilliant way to incorporate the emeralds and to challenge players like never before. It's just, oh my god, this game. Once you take this sucker out, you are finally at the end of your journey. The Master Emerald is back on Angel Island, which is back among the clouds, the Death Egg is finally destroyed, and Sonic and Tails make a lifelong friend in Knuckles the Echidna. And yet, there's still more to talk about. On its own, Sonic and Knuckles proves to be a fantastic experience, but it's still not a complete experience. We'll have to talk about those things in another video. Hello there, I'm Nick. And this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. Or, sometimes sequels that nobody talks about. It feels like every few years I think to myself, I wonder whatever happened to MediEvil. And then conveniently enough, Sony pops out another remake, or throws them into PlayStation All-Stars. And it seems fitting that the latest remake has a demo, as that's all I ever played of the original for the longest time. It's not like I hated the game, it's quite the opposite. It's one of the games I really wanted to like. And I don't know why I never got the full game as a kid, but if I had to guess, well, games were limited to presents, so you had to choose carefully. But eventually I did buy the game, and just a few years ago, finally played it through and beat it. And it's okay, it was pretty good. The Nightmare Before Christmas style still shines through even with these aged PS1 graphics. The witty-britty humor is still as charming as ever, and the levels are memorable and mostly well designed. Mostly. Outside of the charm though, gameplay just isn't as solid as some of the other standouts of this era. Still, it's considered a staple of the classic PlayStation lineup. Not enough to show up on the PlayStation Mini, but, well, enough of a classic to be remade. Twice. We had MediEvil Resurrection on the PSP, which, again, is fine, and it looks like this PS4 remake will be a perfectly fine time if the demo is anything to go off of. But outside of these occasional attempts to bring this series back from the dead, you rarely see any love for the sequel. MediEvil 2 came out in the year 2000, and only in the year 2000. Never got a PSP remake, and even with this new remake coming out, Look, Dan, I love you, buddy, but I don't see this game making enough waves to warrant another shot at the second game. It's not even on the PSN store. The only way to play this in any legitimate capacity is on the original PlayStation, and you have to wonder why. Sir Dan is no Mario, but he's not an unknown quantity. MediEvil is not exactly a hidden gem, so why no love for the second game? Well, in part, it might be because MediEvil didn't exactly need a sequel. Dan was a false hero who came back from the dead, earned his place among the Hall of Heroes, and saved the land of the living from the original evil that felled him in the first place. The entire story of Gallomir and his arc as a character all play out through this one game and wraps up pretty neatly. But a satisfying conclusion don't mean 1 inch of dog dingus when compared to money. Since the first game did well financially, Sony got their Cambridge studio on for a second game before the end of the PlayStation's life cycle. So let's take a look at what they came up with and see if we can figure out why this game seems to go unnoticed when talking about this cherished series. Okay, so the first thing we notice about MediEvil 2 is it takes place in Victoria-era London. So already the title of the game makes no sense. Good job. I only picked up this game because I really enjoyed my time with Dan and Gallomir. They did a wonderful job of building that world of MediEvil and giving a sense of history and identity all of its own. Dropping all of that in favor of London feels like it's taken all the creativity and shoving it out the door. But my initial concerns aside, I'm actually down with this idea. Like I said, they wrapped up Dan's tale pretty nicely, and it makes sense to take this new tale somewhere else and go nuts with whatever new locations and narrative they come up with. So when Dan woke up in a museum as opposed to his crypt, I was just as confused as he was, but eager to explore my new surroundings. And there's also this little cockney ghost around. So I don't know what his story is, but you got a dead kid hovering around through your new adventure, so have fun with that. I just love all the little details in this first level. Since this is a museum that takes place in Victorian-era London, they fill it with false facts, fun little Easter eggs from the first game, dinosaur skeletons that are not exactly put together correctly, and stone boobies! Is that okay? So rendered nips are just fine as long as they're supposed to be statues. Got it.
Don't demonetize me, YouTube! The ESRB said this was okay!
So going through the flow of things, this feels pretty close to the first MediEvil. It's been a couple years since I played it, but so far so good. But once you beat this awesome dinosaur boss, we're brought into the professor's lab, the main hub of the game. And I know this is a weird thing to whine about, but something I notice every now and then in a game sequel is this supporting cast that we've never had to deal with before. I kind of enjoyed my solitude in the first game, and even as a kid I was already sick and tired of these tropey little nobodies coming in and out of nowhere and talking to me like I was watching Nick Jr. I'm just a cranky old man complaining about nothing. These guys are fine. It's what—
Huh?
But— Dan, what's wrong with your voice?
Ow. What on earth is this? What is with that weird voice? They couldn't get the original guy to come in and grunt into the mic for a few minutes? Again, all right, look, I understand the vocal choice. Look at that weird little head of his. I can understand why they went with a voice that sounds like a character from a Monty Python skit as opposed to a different character from a Monty Python skit, but I miss those angry little grunts.
Get on with it!
Again, I'm complaining about nothing. They went back to the old vocal stylings in the remake, so whatever. It's not like the original games Dan was about to win any awards for that performance, so let's keep going. At this point, you meet the professor, who explained that someone got a hold of Zarok's spellbook and has been causing all kinds of naughty business, and it's up to you to set it right. From here, we head off to Kensington, which feels just as confusing as the town level from the first game. In fact, you'll probably see a lot of parallels between the two games in terms of levels, but here they feel a little bit more expansive, and a lot of the time, pretty confusing. Every level has you solving puzzles, which can fall anywhere between clever and nonsensical. Not proud to admit it, but I had to look up a guide a couple of times just to figure some things out. Not super often, and mostly just to find the location of some things, but still something I would prep for when playing this game. I remember the town level being fairly confusing in the first game, and you have at least a few levels just like that in the sequel. And look, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time with each level in this video, but I still want to point out the diversity between the stages. We started off in a museum, then we go into a town, and then we find an excuse to pop into an Egyptian-themed level, which also leads to undead boobies. That's right, they've sexualized a corpse. Hopefully that didn't wake up too many dark feelings in children. So obviously this is meant to be a love interest to Dan, and
I don't normally approve of any old waif or stray, but when they're as pretty as this one, I think we could make exceptions. Interesting. I'll analyze this and see if I can't debrief our friend over here. Shut it down! Shut it down!
Video game! What are you doing? No! They did not just do a close-up shot of a mummified tuchus! Professor! That lady is dead! You keep your meaty little metal fingers to yourself! What is wrong with you?
this game is taking a bold stance on necrophilia. Let's see what else they get up to. It's about this point in the game I'm starting to notice the difficulties ramping up and getting a little irritating. In this particular case, just one stupid smack can send you into a nearby body of water and that eats up an entire life bottle. The rest of the level can be quite a chore trying to find what keys go where and fighting giant mechanical elephants, and look, like I said, not going through every single level. Point is, frustration started to kick in for me here, and near the end of the game, I wanted to murder everything. See, while they did improve some things here and there, my major issues from the first game are still pretty prominent, and unfortunately, comes down to the basic mechanics. You dip in water, you lose a life bottle. Fall from too high a ledge, same story. And that would be a little more forgivable if the controls were just a little bit tighter. The combat basically consists of flailing around your weapon until the enemy falls. I know there's a shield involved, but I didn't really see a need for the thing outside of some very specific instances. It's not intuitive, it's not fun, and neither is the platforming, which is everywhere in the endgame. Yeah, it's still as problematic as ever and super essential in the later levels of the game. Paired that with a camera that just feels like doing its own thing in the middle of a critical moment, and look, I know it's standard for a game to step up the challenge as it carries on, and I'm complaining about a game that's nearly 20 years old, but there were plenty of other games that had this nonsense figured out already. And they did a pretty solid job most of the way through with the weapon variety, if you happen to grab the chalices, and they keep Dan grounded for a good chunk of the first part of the adventure. And while the carnival was a challenge, things didn't get truly stressful until I got to the botanical gardens where I had to—
Oh God!
Where I had to meticulously jump from tree branches or hope that Dan would figure out to climb down a freaking ladder, and that continues on through the rest of the levels, but I didn't have to restart too many times, and, well, I got through it. It was okay. But then we get to the final level, and I just about lost it. Now keep in mind, I have collected every chalice at this point, and the game has given me super armor, a Gatling gun, the works. And I'm still, oh boy. All of the complaints I'm mentioning, fidgety controls, sloppy combat, garbage camera. Yeah, it's all ready to make sure you leave this game hating its guts. But what made this level such a nightmare at the beginning was one of my last major issues with this game. It is so stingy with health. Okay, so to replenish health, you can get energy vials which get you back a tiny chunk of health, or a life bottle which permanently adds another bar to your overall health, very handy, and these little energy fountains which never replenish. Yeah, even if you replay levels, these never come back. Oh, and you don't regain health between levels.
Yeah, so if you're like me and down to the very last chunk of your life, little gold, and pretty short on ammo, yeah, this last level is going to be a pretty bad time. The only thing you can do at this point is to go back to a previous level, find the stupid little energy vials, and beat the level in its entirety. So you have to go back and play through these levels over and over again just to have enough health, just to lose it all to these stupid statues that have fire that shoves you over the edge of the building because I guess setting me ablaze wasn't good enough for you, game. And you have to kill all these horrible little gargoyles and not get hit by whatever this cauldron is spilling out on you, so you better make sure you have a charged shield on hand and then you finally get inside and it's just nothing but bad platforming. I can't even look at this footage. Oh man. This section would be a simple little nothing in any other platformer. And here, it's the hardest portion of the game. But I fought my way through, and even after a couple of game overs, I made it to the last boss. And you better have plenty of ammunition handy, because if you don't, well, this is going to be an even longer, more frustrating battle. But I got through it, and I beat the game. Dan reunites with his lady. They beat the bad guy who cares who he is? Who cares? They hop on the time machine, which, it was a whole thing. It doesn't matter. And then where are we going exactly? Where I guess we go back to Gallimere, where we're greeted with, oh my god! Wait, hey, what was that? That was a jarring ending. What does that mean? Did I do something wrong? That can't be right. There has to be more to this. Okay, let's hop online and see. There's okay, there are two endings. I apparently got the bad ending. To get the good ending, you can't collect the Gatling gun. So let me see if I understand this correctly. The reward you get for getting all of the chalices gives you the bad ending. So collecting chalices is actually a bad thing. So I just went to all this trouble, had to repeat these entire levels. I went back to levels to get those chalices, video game. What are you talking about? What is this even? Ah! All right, so the fan base is debating on which of the two endings is actually canon. But seeing them both back to back, the Gatling-free ending seems way more fitting and conclusive. Normally, I don't want to spoil the end of games on my show, and I did leave out some plot points if you care enough to play it through yourself, but there was no way I couldn't talk about this two-ending nonsense. That final boss was hard enough with the Gatling gun, and it would have been nice to know that I didn't have to bother with the chalices, even if they were established to unlock the good ending in the first game, but hey, no big deal, game, you do you. So, yeah, I didn't like that last level. Most of my complaints ultimately come down to how the game is played. The controls haven't aged well, the camera hasn't aged well, the combat has not aged well. And that's why I hope it gets a remake. See, despite my frustrations, this is still a good game, one with some really clever ideas. I love the variety in levels and weaponry, and I would love to see what modern systems can do with the likes of the Freak Show and Botanical Garden level, and this super freaky rendition of Jack the Ripper. Game, you understand that was a real person who actually killed people, right? Not a giant Freddy Krueger one. Whatever, I'm getting off track. I actually enjoyed the game despite my screaming. I loved some of the puzzles, and the ones I had frustrations with would probably do better with updated mechanics. And that Dan hand mechanic actually played really well. I know I didn't talk about it at all until this point, but it doesn't really show up until halfway through the game, and it's only useful a handful of times. Thank you. Just real quick, this actually is a lot of fun when you get used to it. They come up with some clever puzzles and give Dan a unique perspective on the environment. I really feel like they could have expanded on this if a third game was ever made, but for what we have, it was pretty fun. But the data mechanics hold this game back, and they were probably an issue even when the game first came out in the year 2000. This was right before the PS2, and developers knew how to handle physics in games like this at this point. That's why I feel it deserves a remake. I mean, good for us for getting a Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm gonna play it, I'm probably gonna have a good time, but we didn't really need it. I mean, they're going out of their way to completely change it. And at some point you have to wonder, well, why are you bothering to redo it at all? But here in MediEvil 2, you have a chance to take a good game and turn it into a great game. You take all of that charm, art design, and mechanics and update them for the modern day. The little I played of the first game's remake seems to understand the shortcomings and improve where it can. The combat is still a little flaily, but it's certainly better, and I can finally implement the shield in a way that makes sense. The movement feels good, and I have way more control over his jumps, and the camera isn't at war with me when I'm trying to navigate the world. MediEvil 2 still improves from the original and from a lot of other games in that era, but playing it today you can see it still had a long way to go. That said, there's still plenty to enjoy, and look, if things get too rough, cheat menus exist. Judge me all you want! I'm not playing that museum level 20 times just to get some energy vials. I have things to do. Despite my complaints, this is still a gem of a game that really deserves more attention in a series that, well, just deserves more attention in general. There are so many good ideas that came out from the PS1 era of games, and when it comes to MediEvil 2, this certainly deserves a second chance among the living. Until next time, toot toot. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. And once again, I'm not actually talking about a bad game, just a good game that has a lot of controversy surrounding it. And that controversy is only really applying to hardcore fans, in a community I'm not really a part of. But hey, I still enjoy me some Final Fantasy, and the community I am a part of just kinda treats me like their ex they still haven't gotten over, so let's take a breather from Sonic for a minute. And I don't know if you'd really even call me a Final Fantasy fan, as much as I am a fair-weather Final Fantasy fan. Yeah, I love the games to death, and I was all about them back when everybody else my age was. And honestly, I didn't even jump into the games until a certain electric mouse pushed me into the genre on training wheels. But hey, I'm a gamer, I still know the basics. 3 is actually 6, and the true best of the series, before the series jumped into 3D and gave the spiky boy green eyes, which... I just can't escape it. But yeah, I was caught up in the hype. I've cherished what I finish, and I've read up on characters elsewhere or come across them in Kingdom Hearts or Dissidia or whatever else. You can't escape Final Fantasy if you're a gamer. But that's what I mean when I say I'm a fair-weather fan. The ones I did beat or nearly beat it did resonate with me emotionally on a level few games have ever managed to do. The sheer level of world and character building is intricately designed from top to bottom, and it kept me invested from start to finish a handful of times. But regardless, Final Fantasy VII certainly did that for me. Problem is, I just don't remember most of it. I mean, I distinctly remember environments, music, emotions, and certain moments that nobody can shut up about, but it's been at least 20 years since I've actually played through the game. There's a lot to remember. As much as this game meant to me back in the day, or 9 or 10, I've only ever run through them one time because these are huge games and, well, turn-based RPGs just aren't usually my jam. I gotta be in a very specific mood for those. But as fuzzy as my memory can be, the impact and hype of the game has certainly left its impression. During the mid to late 90s, when everybody was jumping into 3D, you had to go big if you wanted to survive this brave new dimension. Nintendo delayed the N64 over and over again, but I mean, when they did, Mario kinda just set the standard forevermore. Sonic waited even longer until the technology could keep up with them, still making sure to make some 3D cameos here and there on the Saturn. But these are platformers. What about Final Fantasy? Well, in that case, they basically kept the gameplay the same as it ever was. I mean, sure, systems are different from older games, but there's not really anything here in the core gameplay that wouldn't work on older hardware. Yeah, all these characters look dated these days, everything's kind of blocky and not super appealing to a mainstream audience, but that's not what you were seeing in the commercials. What you instead saw were these insane, big, flashy CG cutscenes. That's what Square focused on in the marketing, and it was quite brilliant. That's what got people into the door, and for the first time they realized that RPGs could give you some really engaging stories and narrative and clever yet addicting turn-based combat. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There was so much here. You could really take your time in this world and explore it and get to know these characters and really feel like you are a part of this universe. And they did that with each and every game. It was nuts, man. And as the years went on, Square never really let up on the graphics, and they went even harder on the bombastic effects and over-the-top fight scenes. But again, only really relegated that to cutscenes. The core gameplay still left us politely taking turns setting each other on fire or shoving giant slabs of metal in each other's faces. And that's not a bad thing for everybody. I can only speak for myself here, and this is part of the reason why I ramble on so much about where I stand with the franchise. I can enjoy a solid turn-based experience, but it's not my go-to experience. And when I look at these character designs and when I was watching these fun cutscenes, that's what I wanted to play. I wanted to experience these wacky anime sword fights for myself. Now that the tech can keep up with the flashy action, the main series itself leaned more and more into the action genre. Square has still provided some traditional RPGs every now and then, but Final Fantasy was very obviously trying to go for a mainstream approach, all leading to a point where the Final Fantasy VII Remake plays nothing like the original game. But hey, Square's been doing this for years now. How'd they do with the remake? Overall, in my opinion, it's a lot of fun. I was worried about a lot of things going into this game. Specifically about the combat, I was worried it's going to be a little bit too simplistic yet too complicated at the same time, like mindless spamming of an action button with jarring pauses while you sift through menus looking for the right item or spell, and an awkward mix of action that has to adhere to obnoxious old-school JRPG nonsense. And in the most cynical sense, it kind of is that, but I
liked it. I had a lot of fun with it. Yeah, time to slow down when you're shuffling through menus, but I was enjoying it. I felt like the two genres merged quite nicely, and it felt like there was far more nuance with the fighting than I had even experienced with my first run-through. With a few fights forcing you to learn how to swap between battle stances and counterattacks. Seriously, this fight with Reno here made me feel like I was in an episode of a shonen anime. I could barely land a hit on this guy, and he was really giving me a run for my money. But he doesn't hit that hard or that frequently, giving you enough time to heal and figure out a strategy. Up to this point in the game, I had not really utilized the counter. I don't even think I knew it was here. But you better believe after this fight, I certainly did use this. So yes, there is a bit more going on here than just a mindless hack and slash game. And the swords are only one playstyle. You also get a punch, shoot, and magic stick with the other characters. They're all varied and they're all a lot of fun. They also use Materia, these little magic orbs here, to allow you to use, magic, or stat boosts, or a combination to charge up a spell or weapon, and you equip these materia to your weapons and accessories, giving you plenty of ways to customize your characters as you see fit. You don't get a lot of weapons in the game, but they do keep the stats balanced between them, so you never have to throw one out and replace it like you do with old school RPGs. The iconic Buster Sword always remains a viable option through the game. Still, there are benefits for breaking out of your comfort zones with these weapons. Each one has a unique attack or ability that can only be used if it's equipped, and if you use that technique enough, it will be mastered and part of your arsenal forevermore, giving you plenty of time to accommodate your character playstyles to new stats. This way everyone gets a chance to be a healer, magic user, a hard-hitting bruiser, and everything in between. Well, everyone but Aerith anyway. She dips in and out of the story so much they kind of remain solely on the ranged attacks for her. Barrett usually does too, but he does have a couple of weapons that make him melee, but I'll be surprised if anybody keeps him in this clunky state when Tifa and Cloud just react so much faster to your button prompts, and the wind up and cooldown is just not even comparable between the two characters. And the amount of flying characters you have to deal with, it's just better to keep Barrett a shooter for the most part. You have to juggle all of this while keeping an eye on how to best take down your foes, as they all have specific weaknesses that will fill their stagger meter. You fill this up and you daze these dudes and you multiply your damage output. I would speak on all of this more, but a lot of the time I just dabble around until I got impatient and powered through. Like I said, I felt like I've only scratched the surface on the amount of combinations with materia and combat that could be learned. A major part of RPGs, and a very satisfying one, is leveling up and bumping up stats. And here I think they did a fine job mixing up the need to buff up your characters, yet require you to understand the versatile combat. Again, I don't know if this is a perfect combination, but I think your average Joe is gonna have a lot of fun with this game. It's not perfect, and I'm sure you've heard these complaints elsewhere. Boss fights, for instance, are a little long in the tooth, but I somehow feel like that makes sense. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd be happy shaving off a few minutes here and there, but they feel grand. They feel epic. Just, they also kind of feel like raid bosses in an MMORPG a little bit. Some of the odd jobs start off in a town, then you have to run off somewhere else in the map and kill this many of this one thing or grab this other thing or something along those lines. Those also get a lot of complaints, but for the most part, I was pretty okay with them. I feel like they break up the story and combat well enough. And there's also other mini games or motorcycle missions, and all these are very straightforward. You don't need any detailed breakdown of this stuff, so let's not linger on this point. The story and characters, I was a little worried about as well. Again, I have not played the original for years, but I have played other Square Enix games localized for English-speaking audiences, and
I knew when I met you. You and Kairi smell the same.
There are just some weird-ass anime quirks in some of these games, and I can't stand them. Everyone is gasping or making stupid noises for no reason, just to fill up dead air, I guess. Tifa, and actually just about every girl in this game, is bopping about like that okay boomer girl, and just some very peculiar dialogue choices.
Welcome home, honey. Took your sweet time. Psych.
Who says psych? We stopped saying psych before the original game came out. And then there's this Mr. T sound-alike.
You gonna stand there and pretend you can't hear the planet crying out in pain? I know you can!
You really hear that?
Damn straight I do!
Get help.
God. After listening to this for 30 hours?
Them fighting words.
Yeah, I was an irritable dude when I first started this up. I really didn't like all this anime-ass nonsense happening around me. I was cranky with everybody at first. But you know what? It was worth all of it just to get to this. I kind of feel like these characters grew on me as time passed on, kind of like Cloud himself. And by the time I was done with this game, I was ride or die for these guys. I love these characters. The weeb nonsense is actually toned down from other Square games. Or maybe it's just more fitting here. Maybe this stuff just sounds a little more wooden when it's coming out of Woody's mouth.
My guess
is no one's ever loved you before.
I started off this game annoyed with a lot of little things, and I turned around on just about all of it. And you know what? I'm not gonna pretend like I didn't think it was ridiculous that we were only getting a part of the original game when Square announced that they were remaking Final Fantasy VII. I mean, we were all freaking out. This has been rumored for years, and they were finally doing it. They're finally remaking Final Fantasy VII in multiple parts. Well, there doesn't seem to be an emphasis on that anywhere on the packaging. Seems a little disingenuous. Feel like a lot of us were saying that a lot of people are probably gonna be pissed off when they finally pick up the game. Oh, shocker, that's exactly what happened. I was not happy about the news that multiple games were gonna be made just to cover this one game. Why do we have to Hobbit everything these days? We're gonna Peter Jackson this thing and George Lucas it at the same time? Again, getting ahead of myself. Just look, I get it. In the original game, you zip through some of these spots in 5 seconds, and it takes literally 10 times as long in the remake. But you know what? I'm about it. I know there's a lot of filler here, and it can get jarring. And I don't think you need to have played the original to realize that while you're on your way to stop a giant plate from crushing an entire town, it might not be the most ideal time to detour and solve a Scooby-Doo mystery. But if I'm honest with myself, while some of the stuff isn't great, for the most part, I loved this. And the downtime to get to know this world and these characters was a lot of fun, obnoxious quirks and all. And who didn't love Wall Market? I barely remember Cloud's cross-dressing in the original game, and here I thought they would just sidestep this plot to maintain the badass moody sword boy attitude, but no man, they go all in. And just look at this thirsty girl. She has found her fetish. No judgments, honey. This whole sector is out and loud and horny as hell. It goes straight up bizarre adventure, and I am all about it. Yes, again, there is some weird weeb nonsense that annoys me, but you gotta be in for some of this nonsense, man. Going into this, I was trepidatious. The Square of today is very hit and miss. They still produce quality stuff, but the track record is spotty, and there were some big red flags for me going into the remake. I understand that the original game's visuals are dated as all get out, but the core mechanics, outside of some choppy minigames, have aged just fine. Why would you fix what's not broken? Second, as I've already broke down for you, we were not getting the full game, just the Midgar portion. Splitting games is something Square Enix has been doing for quite a bit, and frankly, I don't like it. I'm sure they would flesh it out into a full game on its own, but do we really need to focus on the extra cannon fodder members of Avalanche? How much of this was going to be needless tedium? I wasn't happy about getting a portion of the game they were remaking, and at the same time, I didn't want to fill up on bread before I got to the meal. Don't waste my time for the sake of wasting time. And my third major concern, and it sort of plays into all of this, was Tetsuya Nomura. Nomura is the director of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it should be noted that he has a lot of history with this specific game. He helped make some specific scenes, but more importantly, he is the character designer behind this game. And that's actually what he's done for the grand majority of his legacy at Square. His designs help shape the identity of not only Final Fantasy VII, but a massive part of Square's Final Fantasy and fantasy-adjacent games. And yes, he does dabble in a lot of roles, producer and director, both of Advent Children and like all of Kingdom Hearts. In Square's eyes, he's done good for them. And in terms of Kingdom Hearts, I loved the first game when it came out, loved the second game when it dropped, but the more I played of these games, the less I enjoyed them. And as gaming narrative evolved through the years, it was hard to enjoy this weird, awkward, stilted dialogue from all of these games. And then they just took forever to finally wrap this stuff up. And I know I'm being very dismissive here. That series does a lot of incredible things, and they are so insanely unique, but stretched through 15 years and spread to every kind of system on the planet, only to rush and wrap it up in a third act of the third game. And by the time I was done with the third game, I looked back at all this and wondered, was it worth it? I don't think so. Nomura is a talented guy, and his strength as an artist is undeniable, despite all the zippers and buckles he seems to be obsessed with. But his strength as a storyteller, that's not so consistent. I don't outright hate everything the guy does, but I certainly was not happy with the news that Nomura was running the show. And now that show would be split into multiple parts. Great! I can't wait to take this old complete package of a video game and spread it out for over a decade onto multiple platforms. That'll be super fun. Gosh, I hope I don't miss the mobile spin-offs. And it's not like that joke is far-fetched. Yeah, they did all that with Kingdom Hearts, but I mean, they did do it with Final Fantasy VII years ago. Instead of remaking the game, they instead made prologues, epilogues, spin-offs, and a whole damn movie, and then just teased a remake of the game on the PS3. And then that just turned out to be a tech demo. There's enough history here with Square, and with 7 specifically, to leave fans more than a little concerned. Still, as convoluted as this history may be, there are very few examples of any of these games being out and out horrible. And look, at the end of the day, there's no way we weren't going to play the remake. And like you already know, the final product product is actually pretty damn good. I didn't expect another groundbreaking masterpiece, but this is actually about what I expected, and that includes some insane stuff that I had no way of expecting. And that all started here, when Cloud first meets Aerith. Again, I don't remember much from the original, but I do remember this being a sweet moment. But here in the remake...
Oh shit, they found me. I can't go back to Azkaban.
I had to rack my brain here, because I certainly did not remember Dementors in the original game. And just when I was about to forget about them, they just keep showing up all over the damn place. And boy, oh boy, by the time this game wrapped up, I gotta commend the Materia orbs on Nomura, because this was a bold move. So here we go into full spoilers, my baby birds. Buckle in. This is why I wanted to make this specific episode. Everything up to this point is known. We know the rocky history of Final Fantasy. We know the remake turned out fine. But now it's time to get into a more nuanced discussion, because as it turns out, these not heartless are the physical representation of destiny, making sure the story plays out exactly as it intended. And they are so important that the last chapter of the game completely derails and goes full wackadoo, and you literally kill Destiny. Nomura likes to play with big philosophical ideas and turn them into deformed monsters for you to hit. Subtlety is not his forte. Like, how are these guys supposed to function? How does their very existence not screw up Destiny? They just show up and put something in place and tell people not to worry about it? Look, the Final Fantasy games are known for doing zany things like having a lovable bunch of pretty kids get together, hang out, take down organized religion, and then kill God. But in terms of game pacing, there's a lot of plotting for a good chunk of the game, and then the last chapter feels like they go full Game of Thrones Season 8. Not even that. It's like watching the first season and then jumping straight into the last episode. They didn't exactly build to this point in the most organic of ways. Also just goes to show how stupid some of these characters are. Like, if these guys hadn't jumped in, they would be dead for the stupidest of reasons. So, what they're driving for here is, now that you have conquered Destiny, going forward, anything can happen. This is the big plot twist that everyone is up in arms about. Some feel like this whole thing is a slap to the face of old school fans, disrespecting the narrative of the original. How dare Nomura mess with this? And others feel like this is a bold, fresh take and are excited to see what's next. Me? Well, as usual, I'm of two minds about it, because Nomura does have a track record of starting things off strong, but taking too long to get to an unsatisfying finish line. I get the idea he was going for, but like, did it have to completely halt the narrative? Did it have to be this on the nose? Again, subtlety is not this dude's forte. I hope you can understand why people are a little on edge. The original is a landmark video game, and it holds a deep emotional importance to so many. Even if the original game is not your favorite, imagine any game you are desperate to have remade. You want to see these characters, this environment, these wonderful moments, boss fights, plot twists. You want to see all of this stuff play out on modern hardware. You want to see a legend preserved. And some dickhead just comes in, dumps Destiny ghosts all over the place, just to tell you at the end that everything's gonna be different. Yes, thank you, game, I get it. Thank you. And that's not even mentioning... him. Even being away from the game for 20 years, there was no way I was forgetting Sephiroth. Mostly because Square Enix won't let me. People are pissed that he is showing up way too early. What made him so badass in the original was the build-up and reveal of this character, only showing hints of his power and bloodlust, making you a little concerned about running into him, maybe even hoping not running into him at all. All that mystery and allure is gone whenever Cloud trips balls in this game, and it happens plenty. And from my perspective, I get it. He's the big iconic bad guy. You knew Square was gonna shove him down your throat eventually. And apparently this Sephi has already played the original game, because this one knows how things are gonna play out. And now he is free to do whatever he wants now that he's no longer shackled to Destiny. Also, like, seriously, who's surprised by Sephiroth anymore? Again, everybody's played the original game, but like, if you're this invested into gaming, you know Sephiroth. His story has been out there for 20 years. He's an iconic character. The allure has been gone for decades now. I can't speak for everybody else. I can't say that you can't reinvigorate what made this character so cool. I'm just saying this nonsense never really bothered me. I fully expected this crap. I had a good time overall, but I somehow left this game feeling the same as when I entered it. Trepidatious. We have all seen fan bases come on strong to something, only to have later installments really rustle their feathers down the line. And I won't lie, I hate these stupid ghosts. Yeah, I get the point, and I think the message overall is kind of awesome, but I really hope we don't see them going forward. I don't want to see these stupid things again. Yeah, I get it. I'm a little nervous going forward. I have not seen Nomura pull off an expertly told story in any game he's made. But then again, I'd be lying if I told you I didn't get swept up in the final fight of Advent Children. And man, Kingdom Hearts had some really awesome moments. And despite the fluff, I generally enjoyed the moment-to-moment gameplay here. As obnoxious as I found Barrett at first, when I got up to the president's office,
oh god, no, Gun Daddy, don't leave me!
I mean, I figured the Ghosts of Christmas Future would patch him up with a nice little Dementor kiss, but still, I was beginning to sweat. Are they alluding to him dying down the road? Is Aerith still on the chopping block? I'm kinda nervous about what comes next, but so are the characters. And that's kind of awesome. They could pull it off, or it could be a train wreck. But if you give me more of these characters and more of this gameplay, I'm probably gonna have a great time. I understand and sympathize with the people that are frustrated with this game, and I feel like their critique is very, very valuable. I don't have to agree with every point, but it makes for interesting conversation and can provide perspective that I would have overlooked. These frustrations are not coming from a place of ignorance. This is coming from a deep understanding of the source material. And if nothing else, the overall message from them is, we can do better. At the same time, don't feel ashamed for loving what you love. Trust me, coming from the Sonic community here, gamers could learn a little bit of compromise. It's not that difficult. I've seen people full-on boycott this game just because it takes place in Midgar, and they're just looking at this as numbers. It's only the first 6 hours of the game. So what? Didn't you want to explore Midgar a little bit more? Don't you think this world deserves a little more attention? Yeah, there's some needless odd jobs here and there, but they play fine. What about these vistas? What about that wonderful dancing minigame in Wall Market? Yeah, maybe we didn't need a backstory for the bodyguard. Maybe we didn't need a third love interest in Jessie. I understand and even agree with the complaints about the padding, anime noises, wacky ass ending. And yes, if you are a newcomer, there's going to be shit near the end of the game that will make no sense to you. I've heard this complaint so many times. But I believe in you. You can figure it out. I'm sorry you didn't play the original game, but I got a secret for you. That game still exists. And it's very readily available. You can play it, nobody's stopping you. There is something to be said for having a piece of media stand on its own. I get that. But this game is not meant to out and out replace the original Final Fantasy VII. You'll in fact get more out of this game if you've played the original. Growing up, there have been a lot of series that I never felt I could jump into. There's some older piece of media that just didn't resonate with me. But eventually, if they did come out with something that was palatable to me, I would jump in. And if I loved it, I would be excited to go backwards and see what else I could discover, what else I could connect with, compare and contrast to this newer thing and go from there. I've done that with movies and games. Hell, you have to practically do that with comics. And I would argue that having this history and legacy makes all this content way more satisfying. Sure, you don't get the same wow factor as kids of the day, but so what? Aren't you kinda curious to see how the original played out? Maybe you'll finally give Crisis Core or Dirge of Cerberus a shot, or crazy thought, try another one of these Final Fantasy games that gets so much praise. 7 isn't the only one out there. Jumping into a franchise is really not that hard. I'm not gonna listen to newcomers complaining that the ending didn't make sense to them. I don't care. I barely remember the original, and I hate to break it to you, every Final Fantasy game gets a little bit bonkers. They usually just take a little bit longer to get there. You fought a house, and you cross-dressed, and you killed Destiny. Whoop-de-doo. That's not even remotely close to the strangeness these games get up to. The game is not perfect, but damn is it a lot of fun. Even if you sat through the spoilers, which I get it, I've done that too. Ultimately, the spoiler is, basically, nobody knows for sure what comes next. That's it. You still have amazing characters, fun action, genuinely hilarious moments, a soundtrack that just won't quit. Even if one of the tracks sounds like Aphex Twin, and if you've never heard of Aphex Twin, have fun. This is not the most detailed analysis, I know, but honestly, I'm hyped again. I'm jonesing to play the original. Hell, I might even replay 9, my favorite of the series. Or maybe it's finally time to jump into one of the more controversial games for the show. I don't know, you tell me. My point is, this game is worth checking out. And if you let Destiny Ghost get to you, the original game is still there. You're gonna be fine. They still capture a lot of the other moments and elements of the original game. If you're not touching this game because it's only playing out a portion of the original, again, I feel like you're really missing out here. These are silly reasons not to enjoy everything else this game provides. Midgar is so iconic. I thought they picked a perfect stopping point for this particular game. Stop looking at it from the amount of content from the original game and look at it from the story beats. Where does it most make sense to take a break, to let this section really flourish and do its own thing? The major story points they make in the first part of the original game get wrapped up pretty nicely. And the larger tale of chasing down Sephiroth, that's the drive and the interest for the bigger, wider world of Gaia. And if they treat it with the care they showed Midgar, I am super excited to see what's next. I love seeing all the crowds in Midgar. I love seeing all the reactions to all the craziness happening around them. I love taking in the detailed ruins. I love spending more time with characters that I completely forgot existed, but I guarantee I'm never gonna forget from here on out. It honestly feels like a lot of this work would have gone to waste if they just kept that snappy pace of the original. I liked having more to do here. Is it superior to the original game? No, but it's not trying to be. At the end of the day, this game's gonna be successful. It generally has a positive buzz around it, and I just kind of wanted to share my thoughts on it. The whole point of Game Apologist is giving something a second chance, to look at it from a different perspective. And speaking personally, I had a complete shift in opinion, and I think that's fascinating. When it was announced, when they told us what they were gonna do with it, I wasn't happy. I came into this guarded, but I kept an open mind, and I wanted to enjoy what I was playing, and I'm glad I did. It's rare for me to agree with Square and some of their business practices, but like Jim Sterling recently said, Square sticks to their guns, man. They made a bold choice, and I want to see this through. And yeah, maybe they could have done something along the lines of Trials of Mana, where they do a remake that's nowhere near as big and large and doesn't require multiple parts to complete, but this is Final Fantasy, man. Like, you need the spectacle. If you're gonna go this big and this hard with any series, this is the one I want them to go this hard for. And for those of you on the fence, I recommend you give this a shot as well. And hey, if you've played it already, let me know what you think. Do you agree with the criticism? Do you love this game? These are all valuable opinions, and I can't wait to get into discussions with you guys about it. Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. So picture this, a standard open world game with some fairly mindless and repetitive tasks to complete, a bare bones upgrade system, and a simple gameplay loop that doesn't really give you much else to do outside of that one thing. Doesn't sound like that much of a game, right? I mean, we got plenty of open world games these days. Why would you spend your time with this one? Well, get this, you get to play a fucking shark. Look, if you're gonna dive into the overpopulated waters of open world sandbox games, you need to have an interesting hook to grab people's attention. And in this case, a shark is all the incentive I need. And given what I just described, you'd be assuming I'm talking about Maneater. And in part, I am. But I'm also referencing something that came out years prior, Jaws Unleashed. No, we're talking about sharks, not hog dogs. Just calm down, Sonic fans, we will get to that eventually. In the case of Maneater, it feels like giving a fun gameplay idea a second chance at life. Maneater's not perfect, but it is a fun game, as I will get into in a little bit. And even between Jaws and Maneater, there have been other games that allowed you to play sharks, including a multiplayer game and, ironically enough, GTA.
Shark.
And even before Jaws Unleashed, there was Treasures of the Deep. And while it's not a shark game, it does feature a bonus shark mode where you play a fish and the goal is to kill as many things in the allotted time. I haven't played that game in a very long time, and I'd like to find an excuse to play it again and talk about it within its own video, so if that sounds interesting to you, let me know. But for today, I want to mainly focus on the connection between Jaws Unleashed and Maneater. If you've played both of these games before, you can very easily see the connections between the two, because almost every problem I have with Jaws Unleashed seems to be solved in Maneater. So let's not waste any more time and dive first into Jaws Unleashed. This was one of the first games I was considering discussing when I was coming up for titles to cover when I was first putting this channel together. Wasn't quite sure when I would cover it, but thanks to Maneater now being released, I think now is a perfect time. And I'm very thankful I did, because if I had just dedicated an episode to Unleashed, I probably wouldn't have a whole lot to talk about. The best part of the game is its selling point, playing a giant shark. But if you've played or at least seen my episode on Lost World, where the big selling point was playing the Tyrannosaurus, in both of those cases, playing through these power fantasies of apex predators comes with a lot of issues, and actually makes these animals seem a lot weaker than what we were anticipating. And that's... well, we'll get into it. You start the game off with your big fish in a brief tutorial section giving you the basic rundown of the core mechanics. You swim around fulfilling objectives that usually require you to eat or destroy things. I mean, you're playing a shark, what were you really expecting to do here? But while that is the ultimate goal of most of these objectives, how you go about them is far from simple. And I mean like top to bottom, everything feels like a chore. And part of that might be my own fault, because I did jump back into Unleash after I played through Maneater, so the controls felt a little off for me. And on top of that, I also played the original Xbox version, which incorporates the black and white buttons for some specific mechanics. I would assume some of these things would have been just placed on top of the PS2 controller. I'll have to go back and check that out. But it took me a long time to get adjusted to Jaws controls. I felt like they incorporated a lot of buttons at once, and it just kind of goofed me up. So it might be easier for other people, but for me and my stupid slow hands, even the controls felt needlessly complicated. I mean, it sounds simple enough. You press the A button to accelerate your fish, you press the R trigger to bite down on prey. You can also do a tail whip attack with the X button, use a lock-on system, activate your detective shark mode, do a sneaky stealth attack with the B button, and even pull off some combos. I mean, it all sounds pretty simple, and a good majority of the time you're just gonna be biting down on things. Again, you're a shark, and violently ripping apart sea life and humans should be the fun part. And it kind of is. You can tell the developers really wanted to relish in the violence. You are playing a great white shark. So once you grab onto a thing, it'll start pluming out blood all over the place. Human screams will start gargling and getting muffled if you drown them underwater. If you rip them apart, you can see guts come out of them. I mean, it's kind of awesome. But once you get over that, the mechanic just feels needlessly complicated, or at least a bit too vague. See, when you hit the R trigger when you're attacking something, you can either continuously pound down on it to keep him chomping, or you can hold down the R trigger and wiggle around the analog stick to shake your prey around. Depending on how you're mouthing your prey, there is a possibility of them slipping out of your toothy grasp, and this isn't exactly consistent from species to species. Obviously, for bigger prey, you can't take them down in one go, but considering the size of the shark, I really don't understand how he has much issue holding down anything. He's larger than just about everything else on this map, aside of like a boss fight and a couple of different whale species that you can't even get to. Seriously, they have blue whales and sperm whales that you can see outside of the boundaries of the map, and I'll admit I did actually go to track them down because I love stupid crap like that. Point is, this shark is so huge that he shouldn't really have any kind of trouble eating anything he gets in front of. And while the violence is over the top and fun, you're gonna get frustrated pretty quickly when he's just indecisively gumming on something as opposed to just gulping it down for health. Because this shark's a bit of a wimp. See, you need to constantly keep eating. Part of the reason is because you have a hunger meter, and if that dips down, it will cut into health. And while I don't have any kind of a problem with that mechanic, your shark is so weak that you need to keep eating anyway so you can replenish health. I was rarely, if ever, eating for the sake of keeping my hunger in check, but I was constantly eating to replenish life. And not only that, you will get some challenges every now and then that require you to eat 9 dolphins within a minute, or kill some divers before they hit the surface of the water. And you're not going to care about how much juice you squirt out of that gusher if you're on a deadline. Quit treating Flipper like a chew toy, just down the thing and get to the next one. And in those specific cases, it's also really hard to tell what's in front of you. Your shark is so big, it's hard to tell what kind of animal you're gonna be eating, which is a bigger problem when you're trying to avoid turtles. I mean, you don't have to, but I did. I like turtles is basically my life motto. Yeah, I'll eat a person before I eat a turtle, I don't care. No, that's not a fair complaint. And yes, Mario is a sick freak. Yeah, that's my video. I'll complain about what I want. I never said I was objective. That's your problem, not mine. But as I've already mentioned, your bike can do more than just consume. You also have the ability to stealth grab humans and water ski them across the surface of the water, I guess. Because nothing says stealth quite like a screaming human impersonating a wacky waving inflatable tube guy while shooting out a fountain of blood. Okay, so obviously that's just for show. Again, you're playing Jaws. Excessive gore is to be expected. You can just quickly submerge your prey instead. But I don't really know what the point of that is. Like, it's a giant gray submarine. Everybody's gonna see that thing. Also, like, you know, what's the point? What are they gonna do about it? Who cares if you have to sneak up on them? You also have the ability to tail smack. Charge forward, aim a grabbed item or prey, and send them flying in a direction, and none of it feels natural. None of it feels intuitive. And the infrequency, imprecision, and awkward button layout of all these techniques adds up to a clunky mess. Part of it, again, I feel like is because I was using an Xbox controller, but overall I feel like there's a lot of needless extra nonsense here. And I get that there's not much of a gain here if all you can do is bite, but if it's not fun, then why is it here? I unlocked moves that I could never figure out, but never needed anyway. But even all that aside, just going through the tutorial here, you get the feeling that you could get used to this jank and still have a pretty fun time. Problem is that, once you're done with the tutorial, which ends with you messing up a boat and chomping on a guy who is apparently filled with Kool-Aid mix, the game introduces you to how you're actually going to be playing through missions, and you see the game's real intention: vague environmental puzzle solving. I should take a moment to note here that Appaloosa, the guys who created the 3D Echo game, were the ones tasked to make Unleashed, and on paper that makes sense, with all this underwater business. Thing is, dolphins and sharks aren't the same thing. It makes sense to design a game with environmental puzzles for a dolphin to solve. It's a pain in almost all the Echo games, but thematically, I feel like it makes sense. They give you a big ol' map and calm, soothing soundtracks to help you sort most of this stuff out. Doesn't really work the same way for a giant killing machine that constantly has things trying to kill him. You see, the first mission outside of the tutorial has Jaws captured and taken to a research center attached to a SeaWorld-like aquarium. Having a shark rampage through this environment is hilarious and a nice callback to the films, but it sets a frustrating precedent going forward. Your first task is to open the door by grabbing a scientist and using his keycard to activate the door. It's hilarious, cheesy, but also something I probably would have never figured out on my own. I instead try to ram into the glass that the game first put me in front of, to no avail, and only really got around to it once the game gave me an on-screen prompt. Problem is, this is the only on-screen prompt you're really gonna get through the game. And yes, the rest of the missions are laid out like this. Things aren't always that challenging once you know what you're doing, but for first-time players, I suspect there's gonna be a lot of frustration. I was left irritated almost immediately following this first room. From here, you have to slam your face into some glass, oh, glad to see it works here, and get poured out into an outdoor tank. And it was at this point I asked a question I bet everyone who's played this game has asked at some point. That's right, it's time to play What Just Killed Me? Was it A, smaller sharks that can attack your blind spot before you have time to notice, let alone react? B, shotgun blasts from humans above the waterline that you obviously can't see? C, tiny little piranhas that look almost exactly like the tiny little harmless fish that you munch on in the open ocean? Or D, all of the above. Yeah, I died a lot here. And once again, a massive issue became noticeable for me. And that is this massive shark. Like I already said, Jaws is so big that you can barely distinguish the models around him sometimes. And that's certainly the case for his enemies. And even if you can see them just fine and just assume that everything needs to die, you are a giant target. You could offset this by making the shark a sturdy bullet sponge, but no, your fish goes belly up at the slightest slap on his fin. You are usually dead well before you figure out what actually did you in. Like I said, it's that T-Rex problem all over again. How scary can this shark really be when another shark a tenth of his size can take him out without you even noticing it happening? Now, look, to be completely fair, this is the start of the game and you need to upgrade your shark at some point, but this is still not a great look. And honestly, there isn't actually a whole lot you need to do in this area. All you really need to do is run your face into that glass tunnel running along the bottom of the tank. But it did take me a little while to figure this out, partially because I didn't think I was seeing much of a reaction when I was ramming into it at first, but also I was under the assumption that they dropped me into this tank to have some sort of experience or explore it a bit. You have destructible bridges and a collectible hiding around a corner. I mean, they built this environment for a reason, right? But I just kept on dying over and over again. And eventually got a strategy down where I had to basically hit and run these smaller sharks and spend the rest of the time swimming away from them. And since I didn't think I saw any kind of reaction out of hitting the tunnel, I just didn't know what to do. But as it turns out, what I actually had to do was sit through this cutscene showing Jaws being poured outside into this tank, and then immediately ram my face into the tube and watch another cutscene of the fish swimming back into the facility. From there, you swim through smaller displays in the aquarium where you'll get eaten by piranhas. Fantastic. But keep soldiering on and eventually you'll run into a freaking orca. And while the jank here is still a bit frustrating, this battle is sloppy, but it's still violent and hilarious. I'm not going to break down every mission in this game. I mean, there aren't many of them, but this first level is emblematic of what I both love and hate about this title. I love the absurdity of it all. I love how surreal it is having a giant shark swim through aquarium displays. Unless you play Animal Crossing exclusively, you don't spend a whole lot of time in aquariums in games. There's something so cool and ridiculous about having this terrifying creature cross over into our world, encroach on the land of the humans who keep the sea on display, having it all culminate in a battle against one of the very few natural predators to great whites, matching blows with a killer whale, and taking out the human's trained pet, both showing it up as an apex predator and as a performer. But what I hate is that it's very frustrating to figure out what to do while being bombarded on all sides by these little insects who can kill you so quickly. And personally, I feel like this game let off a little too strong. You're gonna kick things off with a jailbreak and ripping Shamu moo in half? Blew your load a little early, game. They start off with a tutorial explaining most of what you're gonna do in the open world and most missions. And they end it with you being captured and then throw you into a level having you do things that don't really apply to most of the stuff you just learned. And, frustrations aside, this should be the best level in the game. I certainly found it the most fun and ridiculous in terms of just aesthetic alone. Once you wreck the place and beat the level, we are finally opened up to what has to be one of the worst open world maps I have ever played through. Normally, you would see a map like this and assume the island would be what you're exploring, but being a shark, obviously that's not the case. You'll be in the waters surrounding the island, which means you cannot cut through the center of the map. This is a giant donut. You want to get to the other side? You gotta swim your fat ass all the way around. And if that wasn't bad enough, the map is split. So now you have loading screens to deal with as well. And not only that, but these 10 measly missions of the game are sectioned off on the map as well, regardless of where you're at in the story. So you can stumble into a screen saying you're not yet able to access this level instead of just having mission prompts that pop up at the appropriate time. It's not like you really have much to do outside of eating fish. There are mini missions littered throughout the map, and there are other sections that require you to load into them. And they offer a little bit of variety in terms of scenery, but even then all you get is 1 or 2 mini games and Okay, so another little thing about me. I love the ocean, and I love games based in the ocean, but deep water also freaks me right the hell out. I'm not proud to admit that the first time I loaded up this section and turned just slightly to the left to see a whale corpse out of nowhere genuinely made me jump. So, apologies if that startled anybody else. There's nothing else quite this large in this game, and I really wasn't expecting it. But then I went over and chewed on it and, got over pretty quickly. Outside of this and a couple other little neato spots, there really isn't a whole lot happening on this map, and the water level barely changes. Which, I mean, it makes sense because you're hovering around an island, and there are some collectibles here and there, but, I mean, who cares? What do you get? Movie clips? Production stills? I don't care. Do you care? I don't care. Outside of that, again, you have these quick little missions sprinkled throughout the map, marked by buoys. Some are obnoxious, some are mindless, and most are in between, and they all come with 3 levels of challenge, which all reward you with experience points, which you can then dump into upgrades for your shark, and I would highly recommend you spend that on health as fast as possible. Then you have the missions themselves. While there are only 10, they're all a chore. They have some fun, mindless destruction, but again force in some really obnoxious environmental challenges, like here where your objective is to blow up these 3 oil platforms, and they're all surrounded by turrets. And there's also a big old ship dangling them shark cages over a wrecked sub. The game tells you to blow up these platforms, but does not tell you how. Now, if you don't mind figuring things out, this could be enjoyable. I personally got extremely impatient trying to sort out what I was supposed to do. The ship drops these bombs that you can pick up, and I was under the assumption that I had to grab them and chuck them at the platforms, but nope. That didn't work. I stumbled around forever and eventually figured out that what you actually need to do is take out the ship and the divers, and then you go over to these turrets and attack these yellow balloons in front of them. And this part, I actually had to look up because I just couldn't figure it out. You actually have to go to these torpedoes in the middle of the sunken submarine. You have to pick these up and throw them into the legs of the platform. So that means you have to go back and forth between the sub at least 12 times. Doesn't sound so bad once I explain it, but it was so frustrating figuring this out, and I certainly wasn't proud having to look up the use of the torpedoes, which I didn't even know were there. And in hindsight, yes, there are context clues. Those yellow balloons indicate what you need to hit in front of the turrets, who are placed above the legs, you know, the spots you need to hit. And there's a little green indicator by the torpedoes, the same ones as the bombs use from the ship. But I don't really feel like the game's ever done a great job explaining this stuff to you. There's never a tutorial showing you how to throw something. There's not a single thing here telling you that you can take advantage of these long abandoned torpedoes, and you need to use those instead of these fresh bombs that keep chucking from this endless source. I don't really feel like environmental puzzles this vague have a place in a game where the selling point is a big old shark that's meant to cause mayhem. And what's worse, in my game, I could never turn the turrets off on this last platform. Like seriously, I took out all the balloons, I reset this 3 separate times and did the exact same thing, and the turrets still wouldn't shut off here. My game was legit bugged. I literally could not continue past this point without cheat codes. And the entire game is just like this. I couldn't even fully enjoy a boss fight with a giant squid because nothing is very well telegraphed, and It was all just a frustrating mess. I felt like I stumbled through this entire game. I could keep going, but I think you see my point here. Top to bottom, this is not a very good game. That said, it still did some interesting things that, while not always great, I at least appreciated, like their attention to detail in the model of Jaws himself. Seriously, this is a gorgeous fish. His eyes roll back every time he attacks prey, which is something real great whites will do to protect their eyes while attacking animals in real life. You also can't stay idle for too long. As with real sharks, you need to keep moving. I don't know if I'm so hot on that on a gameplay front, but I still respect the attention to detail. While the game models are usually too tiny to get a good look at, the developers actually included a little mode where you can scroll through the animals in the game. There's a genuine love for the ocean and its animals, even if you're violently killing all of it. Also, apparently there's a dog in the game somewhere, which makes that 2 animals I avoided snarfing down through my playthrough. And last but not least, you get to play a shark! You free Willy from his mortal coil, fight a giant squid in an underwater facility, chew on Flipper like he's a slippery banana, blow up crap, and you eat people. Look, there are worse ways to spend a few hours. And if you're a fan of the movie series, I'm sure there are plenty of references that I just didn't spot. And once you know how to solve these terrible puzzles, you've leveled up your shark a little bit so he doesn't die in an instant when a little fish gives him a smooch, and you got a handle on these wonky controls, it's pretty fine. You're still a great white shark tearing through people. It's just so hard to justify recommending this at all when Maneater decided to show up and completely revitalize this concept. It really is the PS4 Spider-Man for shark games. But before we move on to that, we actually have one more Jaws game that was released on the Nintendo Wii and 3DS. And I don't know where else to talk about it, so let's briefly chat about Jaws Ultimate Predator. I wasn't sure for the longest time if this was a sequel or maybe even a remake, but it's neither of those things. This is a completely different Jaws game. Instead of an open world game where you, big finger quotes here, emulate a shark, this is instead a level-based, again, big finger quotes here, beat 'em up. Yeah, you heard that right. This is a beat 'em up with a shark. And this game is about as cheap as it gets. This is Wii shovelware through and through. The graphics are hideous, and I mean like straight up Nintendo 64 era assets on occasion. And look, they even have like regular old ferns you find on land just sitting around in the water, because why not? You also have motion control QuickTime events, and this thing can be beaten in like 2 hours. It is trash. And it is glorious. The cutscenes are these cheap faux comic designs with people who can't even believably act through a still image. And the voice acting, I think this guy is kind of attempting an accent. He doesn't sound like he's ever fully committing to it.
I have not heard of any such report, but that would be impossible.
But Dr. Batstone, what about—
No more questions, thank you.
I think there's a story here. And I mean, I think there was a story in Jaws Unleashed too, but like, I mean, who cares? I don't care. This half-hearted attempt at a stylized art direction can also be seen on the shark himself with this cel-shaded look. Sometimes, I think. It doesn't look like they applied that to every model in all the environments. And the back of the box says that you get to terrorize Amity Island, and I mean, not really. It doesn't even show up until the final level. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that's not a great white on the cover. I'm more of a turtle dude, obviously, but I'm pretty sure that Jaws Unleashed and Ultimate Predator feature mako sharks, just going by the teeth and the shape of the nose. Oh, and speaking of turtles, I was a little concerned because this time they're a collectible in this game. I don't actually know what they do though, because I never ate one, and I still had no trouble beating this game in a single sitting. And the gameplay itself, where Unleash had you biting and eating constantly with a tail whip here and there, you are instead biting and tail slapping mobs of enemies and maybe eating them occasionally. And hey, if you're like me, you might find great whites scary as all hell. But you want to know how you could get over that immediately? Yeah, it's possible. With a single button, you can destroy the intimidating presence of this monster in an instant. All you have to do is block during combat. You heard that right, your shark can block. And it looks like this. Isn't that precious? Oh, and you can also powerbomb boats.
What is this? No way, natural selection from the top rope!
He's also not ludicrously giant, so you can actually see what you're fighting. And you collect points by whaling on whales and other sea creatures, which you can then use to upgrade your fish. Some unlocks give you new finisher moves, which you will also need a stingray for, which is another 1 or 2 per level collectible. But honestly, you're not going to need more than what you're given. Your health bar and a rage meter, I guess, are displayed by shark teeth, which I find adorable. And in levels, you can also collect shark teeth. They're not for health, like your meter represents. They're just they're for points. I mean, I guess it's a little redundant, but it's fine. What else were you gonna really use? And here you also have a shark vision, which wow. I at least like the color. This helps you get past squids who, I guess, are Jaws' greatest weakness, because you can't actually attack them. So here you actually have stealth in this game, and you have to sneak around the vision cones of squid. And if they catch you, they ink in your face and run off, and you can't damage them at all. Oh my god, this game. A little weird how these tiny squid need to be avoided at all costs, but this colossal monster squid can be taken out with a couple stupid swipes of your Wiimote. And actually, that's how every boss encounter plays out. It's a joke. The bosses are the least challenging part of this game. Even with my Wiimote being not the most responsive thing in the world, this was still very forgiving. And that's kind of a shame, because some of these designs are actually a little badass. I mean, look at this smiling son of a bitch. How creepy is that? You fight sharks, even other great whites, dudes in giant mech suits who I don't even think they fight. I think they just get in those things and cower. And you even have to battle straight up sea monsters. They got Plesiosaurus, Dunkleosteus, and even...
Oh god, what is that?
It's a Leopleurodon, Charlie. Magical Leopleurodon.
They even have Jaws go up against a Megalodon, and it's just so rad. You have to escape a shark attack as a shark. This is so beautifully stupid. You lose a lot of that gorgeous animation and detail from Unleashed. Where that game looked like you were playing an actual shark, this one looks like you are playing the animatronic that was used in the Jaws ride. And yes, I know that also has its own game, and we'll get to that another day. The game is bad, I guess. Cheap, mindless shovelware, and nowhere near as ambitious as Unleashed. But man, it is a hilarious little time. Doesn't really make you feel like a shark, but it also doesn't get bogged down with bad controls and vague goals. It's a silly little time. Regardless, it's still not the best shark game we are talking about today. It's time to finally talk about Maneater. I know I just spoke about Ultimate Predator, but keep in mind what I was saying about Jaws Unleashed, because, like I said at the very start of this video, Maneater was taking notes from that game. And while it's a perfectly fun time on its own, you will have far more respect for this game once you understand what came before, because everything in this game feels like it meant to improve upon the Jaws Unleashed experience. I really and truly believe Maneater would not exist without that licensed precursor. And who knows, maybe there are some interviews out there with the developers of this game explaining just that. Maybe there are even people that worked on Unleashed that are working on this. I honestly have no idea. If you have any references you want to bring up or something I might have missed, by all means, please do. So what's this game do differently from Jaws Unleashed? Well, the very first thing is change the species. You are now playing a bull shark. And while this change does seem arbitrary, I do feel like it is important, and I'll break that down in separate places. And just as a funny note, where the two Jaws games didn't feature a great white shark on the cover, even though you're playing a great white shark, Maneater's cover does feature a great white shark, even though you're not playing a great white shark. Video games, man. God. What both games do the same is give you a taste of the initial open world to give you a handle on the mechanics at play. But Maneater makes this way more fun. It gives you a taste of what a nearly full-powered shark will be like later. Because as it turns out, this is not the shark you will spend most of your time with. This is her mother, who is then captured and you are C-sectioned out. This sets up the Moby Dickish tale of revenge with Scaly Pete, whose daddy was taken out by a mega shark and now vows to take you out after you ripped off his hand. The game also alludes to your shark now having a taste for blood and on the hunt for Pete. That may or may not be the case. This is just a giant violent fish. But this narration is alluded to with the framing of the game. Chris Parnell acts as the voiceover narrator for a reality TV show, which frames the story and gives us an excuse to hear his jokes throughout the game.
If a T-Rex is your favorite dinosaur, then you're boring and unoriginal and you need to pick a different favorite dinosaur.
Shark Week? More like Snark Week. A sass on this boy, wow. Honestly, I love the narration here. It explains some little factoids and you can tell the developers know their stuff. There is a cynical lesson in the importance of preserving the ocean and the horrible impact humans have on the planet, which makes the narrator, and in turn the player, a little more numb to all the slaughtering you'll be partaking in. But back to the baby shark. When compared to Unleashed, this is a brilliant way to start the game. Instead of being a toothy tank the entire time, you start off as an itty-bitty fish who begins her adventure in a shallow swamp. And being a bull shark, that means she can survive the brackish waters of this environment, which gives you a little more variety in the different sections of the map, but we'll get more into that later. You have to munch on little critters to survive and avoid alligators, and this is again just the first section of the map. As you swim around, you'll notice a multitude of collectibles, like these loot box-like crates filled with a bunch of stuff you'll need, as well as license plates, some of which you'll notice seem to be out of the way on an absurd level, hinting at the lunacy that will be unlocked a little bit later. And these signs, which once destroyed, detail little tourist spots that either tell an insane bit of history of Port Clovis or reference a fun little bit of pop culture. This is another fantastic difference compared to Unleashed. Instead of having you swim around an island, the map has waterways that flow into each other and around the city, and they're all segmented off, giving a unique flair to each new area, new species to battle, and a fantastic sense of progression. Seriously, all these Easter eggs reminded me so much of Arkham Asylum, a nice open world map that opened up bit by bit, filled to the brim with little details, and not needlessly huge either. This map is just the right size, and while there is still plenty of shallow water in some of these sections, the water will get deeper as the game progresses. But back to our starting swamp. You will notice that you're not eating for the sake of keeping your hunger meter up. You are, once again, chowing down for the sake of health, but also for experience. You'll need 5 sets of, I guess we'll call them nutritional currency, to keep track of to make sure your shark gets a proper diet. As you can see, turtles are a good source of minerals, but humans have those too, so yes, once again, we are avoiding turtles and mowing down people, and I have no moral qualms about that. And once again, you'll be using your mouth for just about everything. But once again, you also have a tail whip and speed boost. All sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? You can understand how these two shark games could land on similar controls, but again, this feels like they streamlined and improved upon the controls from Unleashed. Even the eating is easier here, or at least it makes a tad more sense. Here you have visible life bars that whittle down as you battle. Once that depletes, you scarf down your prey. And as you level up, obviously it gets easier to chomp down on prey. And if you're fighting a creature above your level and you manage to beat them, they'll explode into meatballs that you can individually scarf up. As you grow larger, the easier it is to munch these things down. Starting off as a baby shark gives you a fantastic sense of accomplishment as you move up the food chain. Instead of starting off as a giant shark and having most of your opponents barely visible and about on the same level as everything else relative to their size, Maneater progressively gives you new creatures to battle as you level up and move into new areas. But before we get too far away from the controls, the rest of the attacks are not dissimilar to those found in Jaws. Combat is, as you'd expect, just violent makeout sessions, and there's a much heavier focus on that than Unleashed. And while it's better, it's not perfect. The lock-on doesn't actually lock on, just faces you towards your opponent. You'll have to click on the stick every time your enemy shoots past you. And the general movement I feel like is a lot of fun. If you're gonna make an open world game, I feel like you need to nail both the map and how you move around in the map. If you're gonna make me run from place to place, then you better give me a fun form of traversal and a diverse aesthetic for me to take in as I move through this world. Maneater makes that a lot of fun. And yes, again, feels like they lifted a lot from Jaws but improved upon it. You don't accelerate with a button, you just press forward on the analog stick. But you can still give your shark a boost of speed with the left trigger, not unlike Unleashed. And movement aside, the controls aren't that dissimilar from Jaws Unleashed. They improve upon things here and there, but once again, this is not perfect. The grand majority of the actions you'll be using a little bit more frequently will be on the top of the control. You bite with one trigger, you dash with the other, you tail smack with one shoulder button, and dodge with the other. Face buttons, of course, have their uses as well, but they're usually used in conjunction with whatever you're using on the top buttons there. Instead of a whole button dedicated to a stealth attack, you instead have a sonar, which can highlight points of interest, enemies, and prey on a map. You can grab onto things and throw them in any direction you want, like Jaws, but unlike that game, time slows down around you when you do this, and you can actually highlight specific targets to take out. In dodging, you'll be doing a whole hell of a lot. Camera does fight you a bit when you're trying to fight something and it keeps jumping from underwater to above water, and dodging in the air is hilarious, as you'll be pirouetting around enemies left and right. It's a glorious sight to behold. And it's also useful for dodging bullets underwater. Unlike Unleashed, where you just kind of got hit and you never knew where it came from, there are laser sights that indicate when you're going to get hit, and giving you a chance to dodge if you're quick enough. And as you grow, you'll find that your shark has the grace of an Olympic ice skater as it barrel rolls through the sky, dodging shots and sinking ships. The challenge and unlocks fall away as the game carries on, but playing the shark becomes more and more enjoyable, and things just become more absurd. The license plates are suddenly much easier to obtain. Like some of these, I thought I literally must learn to fly with the shark. How am I supposed to get up there? But nope, these are just here to challenge your air game. And you'll find yourself on land a surprising amount of time as this shark. Now, Jaws Unleashed certainly allowed your shark to slide up onto beaches, but you stay on land too long, you'll get this 10-second timer, and if you stay on past that, you get an instant death. But Maneater actively encourages you to hop onto land. And yes, this will drain your oxygen, but once that depletes, it starts chipping away at your health. And you can also unlock upgrades to keep you on land longer. I mean, like, for a while. Like, some of these challenges you can't even do unless you just straight up hop into neighborhoods to take out some people. Sharon, I didn't see you at the potluck on Thursday. How you doing, Bob? Some weather we're having, huh? Oh, hi there, Helen. Just out for another power walk. Gotta work off you humans somehow. As you grow and mutate, the game completely releases any semblance of sanity as you transform into a super shark that has bone armor that makes it look like you're off to kill Superman. Or if you prefer, has the ability to poison all of its surroundings, or steal Pikachu's recovery as it bolts through the water and sky with bioelectricity. I mean, whatever jokes I make just fall flat in comparison to the game itself. It's hilarious and it knows it. But like I keep stressing, this game is not perfect. And you could even argue that Unleashed has it beat in certain aspects. Missions, admittingly, aren't anything to write home about. They usually require you to, surprise, eat a bunch of people or a specific species of animal. That, and combined with scourging for collectibles, feels like a standard Ubisoft game. But like I already said, the map is just the right size. The missions are mindless violence and last just as long as they need to. Exploring this detailed world is a blast, and there's enough to collect here without it becoming too tedious. I feel like there's just the right amount of content for this game. Maybe it doesn't have the intricate environmental puzzle solving as Unleashed, but honestly, I don't know who's playing a shark game for that kind of crap. It wasn't fun, it wasn't well implemented, and Maneater just revels in being a stupid, big, off shark. So obviously out of these three, Maneater is my preference. But I am so thankful for Jaws Unleashed for existing. This is such a ridiculous premise. You have to celebrate ideas like this, even if the overall package is less than stellar. I'm so thankful that they did not give up on playable sharks. Without Unleashed, we would not have Maneater, and I personally feel like that would be a shame. There is some fun to be had in all three of these games, and none of them are perfect. But if playing a shark sounds like a stupid good time, what are you waiting for? Maneater, to me, is 20,000 leagues above Jaws' offerings. It's repetitive and it doesn't let you get as clever, but knows exactly what it is and doesn't bog you down with frustrations, and just lets you have some good old mindless fun and a great map to rampage all over. It's a miracle it's as fun as it is, and you can't stop me from singing its praise. It's one of my favorite games this year. I'm probably gonna 100% it, and well, I guess I'm done with that. Most of my dreams start fading away the instant I wake up, but every now and then one of them will stick with me as vivid as if it were an actual memory. And there was this one dream I had where I was at this like 50s style diner, one of those burger and shake shacks where you just drive up and the waitress would just rollerblade on up to you. For some reason, I was at one of these things, and the waitress came up, dress, rollerblades and all, and bent down to take my order. And it was at that moment I realized my waitress was actually Sam Raimi in disguise. And I was like, you! And he just had this look of fear, like he'd been found out, like I'd been looking for him this whole time. Then he skated off, skirt and all, just into like this bush or something. Never saw him again. It's not a very good story, but I was really upset about Spider-Man 3, and I guess I also wanted like a chocolate shake or something, I don't know.
Giant lizards!
Hello there, I'm Nick, and this is the Game Apologist, where we look for the good in bad games. And sometimes those bad games are attached to bad movies, as is the case with Spider-Man 3. Now I'm already expecting plenty of angry little comments because anytime I bring up Spidey 3, I end up trashing this trash. But it's the kind of trash you rummage through, and sometimes you find some pretty cool stuff. To give you some personal context, back in 2007, I was really looking forward to this flick. I loved and still love Spider-Man 1 and 2, and I loved most of the games attached to those movies. But as revolutionary and important as the first two movies were to the superhero genre, everyone deserved better than this mess. Same goes for the video games. Spider-Man 2 stepped things up and made you really feel like Batman. We have seen better work from all of these people involved with these projects. Like many, I went in hyped as all get out, but left the theater loathing this movie. And, well, a lot of these games when they came out. But even after all these years later, I find myself strangely fascinated by them. So much so that last year I played all the video games released for the consoles and handhelds that shared this movie's name. By the end of all of it, I still wouldn't call anything Spider-Man 3, well, quality. but I certainly had a newfound appreciation for this weird little part of the franchise, and actually completely get why some people adore this movie and these games, ironically or otherwise. There's a very distinct style unique to this black sheep of the trilogy, and simply being attached to such an iconic version of the Spider-Man mythos just adds to all that allure, even all these years later. And clearly the slow burn of Spider-Man 3 works for YouTube videos as well, because, well, I made this video last year and all of a sudden it has views. What? I'm very thankful, don't get me wrong, I'm really proud of that video. But a lot of folks were quick to point out that I left out 2 games in my little showcase. 2 games I was fully aware of, but just dismissed. Surely there was nothing worth talking about. They're not even console games, who cares? Well, you guys do apparently, and today we are rectifying that mistake and plugging in those missing gaps from the list. And we'll start our plugging with this. Take it all in. This is the Spider-Man 3 plug and play from Jakks Pacific. And I know what you're thinking, what part of the body are you supposed to play this thing with? Now I could wiggle this thing around all day, but there is still a game ready to whip out all over the screen, so let's take a look. Now when I do Game Apologist episodes specifically, I normally break down what's bad about the thing before I talk about what's good, but we're gonna skip that setup because when it comes to more obscure stuff like this, I tend not to find a lot of coverage online, so instead I'm gonna show you as much of this weird oddity as possible because, well, nobody else is. We start things off with the iconic and overused first shot of the mopey little bug. From the title screen, we get to a, quite frankly, adorable mode selection screen where you guide Spider-Man from light pole to light pole to choose between story, arcade, or some more technical options if you'd like. We'll start off with story mode and, oh, that's precious. Okay, well, have to admit, first time I came across this game, I didn't expect it to be a shoot 'em up. So you swing through New York, shooting down New Goblin's many gadgets in between taking shots at the Goblin himself. You'll be randomly rewarded with health and power-ups like multi-shots or a needless boost in speed. It's basic shmup stuff. Problem is, usually those games are designed around a jet or some kind of flying machine or character. Spider-Man, as you might be aware, does not fly. He swings. And the game takes his momentum and height into account. Now, regardless of when you shoot your spider spooge all over Harry's gadgets, the shots at least always stay consistent. You never have to worry about shooting under or over the gadgets. But one of the buttons lets Spider-Man punch and flail, which can do a substantial amount of damage, but you need to be real close to Harry and you need to be at the peak height of your swing for it to land. I guess it's a bit of a reward if you can time it well enough, but ultimately there's not much use for this unless Harry is just up in your spandex. To be fair, he will do that fairly frequently. But even with the web shot, you can really take a massive chunk of his health, if not defeat him outright. You also get on-screen prompts for, I don't know, quick time dodging? I don't know what this is. The attacks and buttons aside, the movement is, well, I mean, it makes enough sense considering that you're swinging instead of flying, but I wouldn't play this right after R-Type or Gradius, or well, any actual shmup. A massive amount of this genre are bullet hells because they require pinpoint precision from the player's movement of the ship. You don't get that with Spider-Man. But this isn't a bullet hell. The enemy layout seems to take account for Spider-Man's movements. I never had much challenge taking down robots or grabbing power-ups. But it did happen all the same, and it never felt like it was my fault. It felt like the game's. Again, this is not a massive issue. At least the web power-ups and health move off screen fairly slowly, and ultimately I didn't have any issue taking out the Goblin. Well, while I was on easy mode, anyway. Trying it again on hard difficulty certainly upped the challenge. I only beat it because I got lucky and somebody dropped a health power-up. But nothing changes a whole lot on the harder difficulties. The enemy layouts are still the same, they just do more damage. You have 3 levels of this, and it can get tedious pretty quickly. Complaints aside, I can't help but find charm in a Spider-Man shmup. Not exactly a must-play of the genre, but if your nerdy interests cross paths between comic books and classic gaming, this is pretty precious. Considering the character, platform, and every other thing working against these guys who made the game, I appreciate this exists, even for novelty alone. But it doesn't stop there, because once you beat the 3rd level and watch Spider-Man's little victory breakdance, we are then introduced to what is the actual meat of the game. Going forward from here, every form of gameplay is basically an offshoot of a classic side-scrolling brawler. And also like old school games, I have to imagine this thing came with an instruction booklet that would have probably made things a little more handy because I was a whole lot confused when I first started off here. You kick things off by kicking people and punching them in the face. And once you clear out the baddies, the game tells you to web up. All right, now I'm web swinging and what's going on? As you can see, there are some extra points and some other nonsense sprinkled around here. You might also notice there are some arrows pointing downward, so I guess this is kind of a hub world and we need to drop down where the arrow points us to drop down. So we'll just head on down and, I guess I overshot that a little bit. All right, let's turn it back around and let's give another, okay, there it goes. All right, bye-bye. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can, but can he not? Just for a minute? I just want to go down. I want to go down there. I can't get him exactly where I want him while he's swinging, be it with these stupid arrows or trying to nab the little health thing right. Thankfully, this is not actually as bad as it seems. Even if you don't hit the arrow, you're likely to get where you need to get going. Granted, I did unintentionally pop back into areas I had already cleared, but overall it's fine. As for the power-ups, once I cleared an area near a health power-up, the game normally shot me straight up into it, so no real problem there, I guess. Ultimately, this web-swinging portion just kind of feels a little bit needless. The main chunk of the game is gonna be on the ground. You're basically rolling through here, clearing bad guys and saving the same guy over and over again, be it from a hanging ledge or from some random thugs playing tug of war with his bag.
That's my purse! I don't know you!
All while this is happening, you need to keep track of your health as the black suit will drain it. You refresh it by clearing out thugs and saving lives and just violence in general, and also with the help of fans. Occasionally you'll come across sections where you'll drain your fan's life force to feed on it yourself. Just like what I'm doing with this video right now. Yeah, I save your comment saying you're not a fan. I already know. Once you clear out every section and save who you need to save, which, again, just this guy, this one sprite, that's it, you then switch over to a level where you need to keep knocking Chaos Emeralds or dinner plates out of Sandman, all while beating up his thugs. Once you hit a certain criteria, either you or Sandman will smack the other into the next section. On higher difficulties, you have to knock out more jewels or more plates, and these tiny little ninjas can gank them from you if you're not careful, but you're mostly just punching the dude in the face. There's no real strategy here, and the way you collect health is a little bit different this time in this particular level, as it comes flying out of goons like they're piñatas. These sections go back and forth for a while until the level finally ends, and again, it's pretty tedious. And all of these gameplay styles will just swap back and forth for multiple levels until the final couple where you're finally introduced to Venom. This still uses side-scrolling, but this time you have to navigate a maze of an unfinished building while fending off Venom and Sandman. On easy mode, you can just beat the crap out of these guys over and over again with little worry, but they will keep respawning, so there's little point to it. But on harder modes, they do provide a little bit more stress. There are little triggers you can set off to get them off your back for a minute. And I'm not gonna lie, Spidey's draft neck didn't make for the most responsive of controls while I was trying to hop from floor to floor here. Still, it's a cool enough concept. Once you rescue Mary Jane, you get the wrong Spider-Man logo. Neat? While there is a healthy amount of variety, outside of the goblin stuff, it's basically the same set of mechanics, and that gameplay is not great. Not as horrible as you might expect, it's pretty mindless, but it's competent enough. If you enjoy those Spider-Man brawlers from the 16-bit days, you might find some enjoyment from this. I'll be frank with you guys, those games were not super great either, but still probably a step above this. And again, play on normal or hard because easy mode shows you just how meh this whole thing is. And what is nice is that this thing will save your score and unlock new challenges, but it's all remixed of the same stuff you've already seen. And the arcade mode just lets you pick what game style you want to dick around with instead of having to do everything in order. I went, oh, okay, well, there are some instructions that would have been nice in the story mode. But that's basically it. This is the Spider-Man 3 plug-and-play game. Now, there's no ROM for this thing for you to find, and honestly, outside of a YouTube video explaining what this is, there isn't much here to justify going out of your way to track this down for yourself. Unless you're a sucker for goofy gaming toys, a hardcore spider collector, or nostalgic for this very specific thing from your childhood. Online, I'm seeing this thing for around 20 bucks on eBay, which I believe was the original asking price back in 2007. But either way, adjusting for inflation or not, this is not worth $20. I've seen it in thrift stores a handful of times, and I spent like $5 on mine. For that money, yeah, it was worth my time for $5. As dismissive as I sound, please understand that that's just me being honest about recommending this thing to an average consumer, and being honest about the actual quality of the game provided. But truth is, I love this thing. Yeah, this game is far from perfect, but it was fun enough, and I love this stupid stick. While they were prominent, plug-and-play games were one of those things I would just pass without even giving a side-eyed glance to. But 10 years later, in a pile of junk on a thrift store shelf, it definitely caught my eye. And that's exactly how I came across this spider stick. And honestly, I'm glad you guys kept bringing this sucker up in the comments, because this did turn out to be an interesting little game. But that's only one of the 2 games you guys kept pointing out to me. There was also a Java-based mobile game released alongside this movie. And like the plug and play, I was aware of its existence, but very dismissive all the same. I played a good handful of these type of games back in the day and, well, just did not see the point when Sony and Nintendo's handhelds just trounced these little nothing games. Looking back on it now, once again, I find myself intrigued because, well, since I passed it up back in the day, there's now this treasure trove of weird Java games for me to discover. And it's fun seeing how developers crunch these suckers down onto phones. Being a big Hollywood release and existing on every other platform possible, Spider-Man 3, of course, had to have a mobile port. And I gotta tell you, I was kind of impressed. Now, again, I've not played a whole lot of Java games, so I don't know how it compares to other action platformers. And there's an immediate problem I noticed in terms of these awful MIDI tracks. They're not the worst things in the world, but you're not gonna be jamming to these things. And they all just end. They don't loop, so once the song plays out, you'll just spend the rest of the level in silence and... well, now we're all just uncomfortable, aren't we? MIDIs are weird. We used to pay money for these things. Like seriously, we used to give actual dollars to have our phones bleep some nonsense that barely resembled a song. What a time to be alive. Okay, now that I've got my dumb joke out of the way, for what it is, I have to say the developers did a pretty commendable job making Spider-Man work on a game you're meant to play with just your thumb. It's nothing life-changing, and you certainly had other portable spider experiences you could go with instead, but this is kinda rad. The animation is fantastic, at least while emulated. I'm sure this would have ran horribly on whatever I was sporting back in the day. And the controls work commendably well. You even unlock new moves in between your first few levels. And the game will require you to use these unlocked skills, or at the very least set up scenarios for you where you can play around with them. And you can stick to walls, web swing, punch, kick, sometimes pull off neat little combos. The game has Spider-Man crawl around a map designed around his abilities, taking out bad guys, or Eddie Brock's cameras, or facing off with one of the villains from the movie. Once you get the black suit, you once again need to keep an eye on your health, as the symbiote will slowly drain it. You'll be required to bust up some things, or, well, bust heads, if you want to keep your health maintained. And again, like the plug and play, I had no issues with easy mode, except for the last level, but we'll get to that. Normal is a nice balance, and hard mode actually proved to be a bit challenging. The boss fights are a little hit and miss, but for the most part, again, I was impressed. The first encounter with Harry just had me punch him until he Sparta kicked me away. Sandman has you track him down in a sewer where you can't stay still, otherwise you're gonna get caught in a sand trap. Then you'll fight him almost immediately afterwards in a far more underwhelming fight. I think I'm supposed to drop these water towers on him, but I don't know, I couldn't manage it, so I'm sure I was just doing something wrong here. You later fight Harry again, but this time, the game requires you to use some of the moves you've obtained in your adventure. This is pretty neat stuff. I did have a rough time of it with Venom for a minute. You can't let him reach Mary Jane at the top of this building, and he'll just combo you off the side if he gets too close to you, and there's not really anything else you can do about it. Once you get knocked down, you're done. And then, of course, once you restart the level, you have to watch the text screens again. It's all super exciting. But after a few tries, I got a loop going by making the symbiote go nuts with the noise I was making with the trash can. Then I'd smack him a bit, and smack the can again, and just rinse and repeat. I know this is basic stuff, but I like that the game requires you to take advantage of Venom's weakness instead of just running up to him and punching him until he falls down. Once you beat the game, you unlock the ability to choose between the black or red spider suit for any level. Just keep in mind, with the extra power of the black suit, if you're not in an area where you can break stuff to regain health, you're gonna have your work cut out for you. There's maybe like an hour's worth of a game here if you play around with the difficulties and replay levels with a different suit, but even that is stretching it. The same goes for the plug and play. Both at least give some incentive to replay things, but the core games don't leave much to be desired after that first experience. That said, I'm really glad I tried these games out. I don't have many Java or plug-and-play games to compare to, and compared to other Spider-Man 3 games, these are still at the bottom of the list of recommendations. Well, I don't know, now that I'm thinking about it, I had a pretty awful time with Spider-Man 3DS. I might almost want to play these more than that one. Regardless, for what these are, I'm glad for the experience, even if a lot of the charm is in the novelty, but I love my spider stick. And the mobile game made me really wish these sprites were used in the GBA game, because these look fantastic. There is more here than what was necessary, and I for one appreciate it. So I hope this video did something for you, be it satiate your curiosity about one of these things, tickled you in the warm and fuzzies if you haven't seen this stuff in a while, or made you aware of something you might find genuine enjoyment from if you're a weirdo like me and you just love the very concept of these silly things. I still feel like I'm not quite done with this particular topic. Well, topics, actually, be it Spider-Man, or Raimi's version of the character, Java games, plug and plays, or even Spider-Man 3. And if you want more Spider-Man from me, well, I did just recently lend my voice to Aki Dave's video covering the GBA Spider-Man games. Also, Dave, I just realized I just said your channel name out loud for the very first time in my life, and I don't know if it's Aki Dave or Akai Dave or something like that. I just had a very long debate on whether or not the dude with the long gray hair in Final Fantasy VII was called Sephiroth or Sephiroth. That was a real conversation I had. If you like what you saw, like the bell or the subscribe. You know how I don't care. You know how that stuff works. If you want to be supportive, I'd appreciate it. If you'd like, I also have a Patreon, and I'm actually going to be rolling out the first reward tiers this upcoming week. For a single $1, all of our Patreon supporters are getting early access to the first episode of Sonic Speed Reading. That's a series where I'm going to be covering all things Sonic comics, be it IDW, Archie, or Fleetway, or any of the goofy offshoot mangas and webcomics, all that stuff, maybe even the novels. Also working on a ton of other cool ideas there, but point is, I got that there. If you'd like, if you can't, who can blame you? Times are pretty tough for everybody right now, so take care of you and yours, but if you want to throw a buck my way, you can do it that way. Otherwise, just wait like a week or something like that. It's not going to be timed exclusive for super long. Alright, that's enough rambling like a lunatic. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Toot toot, web warriors.
I said get me giant lizards and I meant it, Parker. You think I don't know the difference between some guy in a costume and the real deal? Get me giant lizards or you're fired.